A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, a great adventure took place.
Talking Bird, a special edition.
Hello, and welcome to Talking Bird, the special edition, episode 69. I'm your host, Robert Zachary, along with my co-host, John Llewellyn. Hello, John.
Hello.
Like the gap there. You're like, there was a gap. He left.
You didn't see. I saluted you with my glass of water here. I don't know why I did that. And obviously, you can't see it.
We don't use our webcams.
No.
I thought maybe
Salute.
like
hello.
I thought maybe you were gonna go 69.
Well,
your podcast is about sex.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's about Star
It is
Wars.
not.
We're 2 days away.
Yeah.
Well, yes. Well,
yeah.
it depends
I
on
guess
where
I
you
should
are.
say that with more enthusiasm. We're 2 days away. Wow.
I know. It's a weird feeling. It's not. Talked a little bit. I'll just touch on this. It's like I will say that I don't feel the same way I did when I was at the cusp of The Force Awakens. It's kind of more of an amorphous kind of. I'm definitely excited. I definitely want to see it. I'm going. Like I said, I'm going on the 15th at 7 p.m. John, unfortunately, he's got another 10 days or something like that to avoid spoilers.
At this point, I think it's 13 days.
Sweet Lord, dude.
13 days.
Are you going to be?
Well, I'll be out of town for 10 of those days.
But what are you going to be?
And then one of those days is Christmas Eve, and the other day is Christmas Day.
Yeah. So, hey, man, that's the you're going to be somewhere where there's no movie theaters, or people that don't want to go see it with you, or whatever, right?
Well, I'll just be busy driving around seeing family. I'm not really going to have 3 hours to take out of my day to go to the movie theater.
I mean, people laugh about that, but going to the movies can be a real pain in the butt, especially during the holidays. Because it's like every time I've ever tried to organize a movie viewing during Christmas, it's like it becomes this fight about well, no, I want to see this, and I'm like, I always had something in the back of my mind, like I was just hoping we'd all go to this one movie. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's the thing too, right? The kind of stereotype of going out of town to visit family for the holidays is that invariably you just all kind of end up sitting around going so what are we supposed to do? And that's why you go to the movies, because it's 3 hours to kill where you're doing something as a family, but you don't actually have to sit in your living room and have the same conversation that you had yesterday. But in my case, because of my family setup, right? So I'm going to be going to the DC area, but my mom lives in Virginia. My dad lives in Maryland. I have relatives in New Jersey who I'm going up to see for a couple of days. So it's my days and nights are going to be a little more packed with things to do. A lot of which is just travel and driving from one place to the other. So yeah, I don't have that big chunk of time where everyone's going to be like, "Ooh, we gotta find something to do together. Let's go to the movies."
Yeah, that is a tall order for the holiday season. I'm not going to say I'm not envious because family's good, but that does sound like a lot of driving. Is it?
Yeah.
Is it snowy around that part of the country this time of year?
It can be. It depends on the year. I think this year it is going to snow a tiny bit, not a whole lot. Some years it snows a bunch. Some years it doesn't. It just depends on the wind patterns and the clouds, whatever Mother Nature wants to gift to us.
I think this is our second episode in a row where I've made us talk about weather. This is actually this is our announcement. 2017, we're going to be a meteorology podcast. Right. We're dumping Star Wars. We're talking.
When are they going to put a weather balloon in Star Wars?
Exactly. Well, there needs to be more weather balloons. Yeah. So yeah, we're 2 days away, and like I said, I'm like cautiously optimistic, as I misspoke last week when I thought that today was the big premiere. I don't know why I thought that. I must have read it somewhere. But actually, the big premiere was on Saturday. Yeah. And it was in Hollywood, of course, where these things tend to happen. And you didn't watch the live stream, right? Or did you?
No, I didn't.
So I caught it later. I didn't watch it live. And I would say that, it was interesting. I had to skip, luckily, because it was recorded, I could skip over because I'm at that point where I do not want to see any full sequences from the movie. And I still haven't.
Right.
Or clips or whatever. I mean, I've definitely seen little pictures here and there, but I'm generally avoiding that just because I want to experience it as a whole. I mean, I think it's great that they're showing it half an hour to press and stuff like that. I don't want to consume it that way. It's just not how I think. So I'm kind of like you're probably and you've got that taller order that you're probably just going to be because as time goes on, it starts to widen out, and then the bigger clips in the commercials. So you're probably not going to be watching a lot of TV for the next couple weeks. I definitely am off of Hulu's driving me nuts because all those forced commercials, and then all of a sudden you're like, and now a clip from Rogue One, no. So it's it's that kind of
it's getting to be a lot.
Yeah, but it should be fun. The early reviews, I mean, I don't consider this spoilers, but if you do, the early reviews have been good. I mean, definitely we're dealing with people that are Star Wars fans and their reactions. I haven't gone into any kind of in-depth reading of reviews. Most of them fall in that realm of the hot takes. A couple people are now doing, they're doing their episode placements and stuff like that, but this isn't an episode movie, so I don't think it really works that way. I haven't heard any, what did I see? I think it was the New Yorker. It was like a thumbnail, thing where basically it's like, should they stop doing Star Wars sequels or something like that? Now, I don't know what that means. That might just be some clickbait. Everybody has to do clickbait now. Our local paper here in Seattle is a notorious, the guy who writes is a notorious hater of all movies. So I won't look at and usually they have clickbait review, titles too. So I will be avoiding our local paper for a couple days.
Yeah.
I can't imagine him enjoying anything that was Star Wars, but generally I think a lot of the anxiety that people may have had, about reshoots and whatnot, may have been slightly I don't want to say unfounded, because maybe just, I don't know, maybe it's just all for naught. Maybe it turned out that these reshoots that people have been talking about were a net positive for the movie, whereas sometimes that is not true. I will say one more spoilerish thing, so cover your ears or whatever. I've heard, much like The Force Awakens, there are sequences in the trailer that do not occur in the film.
How dare they?
How dare they?
How dare they?
How dare
what do they
they
think this is?
I know, and I'm sure it has
how rude.
I'm sure it has a lot to do with Forrest Whitaker's how he looked in the first trailer versus every subsequent thing we've heard.
Right. Which means it's time to talk about the reshoots again.
Yes, let's talk about those reshoots.
One last time before we actually see the movie, shall we?
One last time.
I mean, these things keep coming up, and I guess Gareth Edwards finally talked about them. He finally responded to a question about them, because I'm sure people wanted to ask him prior to this. But so this is an interview he did with, the LA Times, I think. And so he says, well, just imagine this in Gareth Edwards' British accent. He said, "What?"
He's a bit like this, isn't he?
Well, what happened was, I'd say a third of the movie or more has this embedded documentary style to it. And as a result, we shot hours and hours and days of material. Now, normally when you put a film together, it goes together like A, B, C, D, E, and you move on. Whereas we had so many permutations, so many different ways it could be constructed, it took longer in the edit to find the exact version. And so, he goes on and says basically they always planned to do pickups and reshoots, but it just took them a while to figure out what exactly they needed to pick up and reshoot. And Disney said, yeah, we'll give you whatever you need. So, originally their original estimate was about 600 visual effects shots, and that went up to about 1,700. And, so that's an extra 1,000 to 1,100 effect shots that they had to do in not a lot of time, really. So he said we never really came up for air until about a week ago. So, we've been talking for a while that like they're still working on this movie, and that is true. Like they probably finished the movie like right before that premiere. And then he's asked about Tony Gilroy. And he says, things kept improving, the film was getting better and better. And this is Star Wars. Star Wars is always a thing that has a lot of people working on it. And it's never really been a thing you can make on your own because you have all the costume folks to the visual effects folks and the props department. And it's always really a team effort. And so having Gilroy involved, just, that's all that is. Right. And so then Riz Ahmed was also asked about it. And he said, basically, look, it's to everyone's credit that they kind of said that they were willing to kind of unravel some of this in order to make it look right, rather than just try to like patch it over, with some reshoots here and there. Okay, well, now that we figured out what this movie's going to be, we need to kind of rethink a lot of this. And so let's do that rather than, let's just take what we have and just fix it here and there. So that's probably going to be the last word on these reshoots before the movie comes out. I mean, to me, it sounds like, not to toot our own horns here on episode 69, but kind of what you and I have been saying for a while, that these reshoots always happen, but then also it's kind of not surprising that George. This sounds very similar to kind of how George Lucas worked with the prequels anyway, where he kind of created the movie in editing, or the movies, I should say, in editing, and the pickups and reshoots could be little things, or it could be, okay, let's construct an entire droid factory sequence, right? And that was technically part of the reshoots, but that was a whole new sequence that he just came up with the idea for when he was editing the original footage. So, this isn't really something new for Star Wars. I think the fact that it's not the same person, right? That it was Tony Gilroy supervising these and not Gareth Edwards. And that I think maybe a little bit was maybe hope on people's part that with George Lucas not working on these anymore, that we wouldn't get that kind of crazy way of making these movies. And so right. The fact that they're doing it again, it's like, I thought we were done with that. But I do think it is interesting to hear, first of all, how few visual effect shots were originally in the movie. I mean, I guess when I stop and think about it, it makes a little bit of sense if, Edwards wanted to do this kind of handheld look, you're embedded with this group of rebels and it's like war, that seems, to be more of like a practical effects kind of thing where
real sets,
right. So the fact that, I mean, even then 1,700 effect shots, I think that's probably close to episodes 1 or 2, I would think. Cause I think by episode 3, I think weren't there like 2,000 effect shots, or maybe it was about 1,700, by the time they got to episode 3. So it's nothing that ILM hasn't done before, but just I think the time frame in which they had to put these things together was probably a crunch. And then just the fact that I mean, I don't remember hearing that like Godzilla was made this way. I mean, Gareth Edwards' first movie, or first big theatrical release, it wasn't even that big, but Monsters, that was kind of a similar like embedded documentary style for parts of it. So maybe he shot and edited it in a similar way, but I don't remember hearing that Godzilla was done this way, where like they just shot a bunch of footage and then in editing kind of figured out what the movie was going to be and then went back and redid it. So I don't know if this is like a return to form for him, or if this is the way he's always worked, or if this is like something completely new for him.
Yeah, I think that I'd heard that basically in the production of his first film, Monsters, that, how was it? I forget the guy, the woman and the man. I think Scoot McNairy, and I forget the actor's name, that the co-star, that they filmed all that stuff.
Whitney Able.
You said Able?
It's spelled Able, so okay. I assume it's Able.
Well, anyway, to make sure she gets credit. Anyway, they did their sequences with a kind of a framework of the prose of the story, and that a lot of that, not to be too spoilery, a lot of the effect shots are actually at the end of the film anyway. And he kind of just did it, and they're reacting, and it's one of those things where it's become a very different workflow than, say, when I was a kid and I used to watch, behind the scenes of the making of, Return of the Jedi, and they would, have to stand in front of these bright blue screens in order to, superimpose a spaceship battle going on. Now, right. It seems it's actually, they could do these things even if they didn't, even as far as back as the special edition, they could actually, digitally cut holes into walls and add right. things that where blue screen didn't exist. So I feel like that's only improved. I never heard anything about that. That'd be the closest to a thing where he constructed the movie and then went back and added stuff. But, even Lucas, in the heyday, it makes me laugh now, 40 years on, that they're still like a week away and they're still in the editing bay. That has a lot to do with the way A New Hope was constructed. I mean, a lot of sequences for the cantina scene were shot as pickups. Not on the acting sequences, but generally like your alien inserts and whatnot. Those were done in Hollywood later on. I mean, there's a big history that these things. It used to be like, that would be if there was like they were working right up to the end, that was actually a sign of like, we have problems. And I don't think it necessarily means that anymore. It's like you can kind of these 40 years ago, Lucas had these same kind of issues. I would say that the one movie he didn't have these issues with were I think Jedi had a pretty smooth post-production time. As far as I understood, it wasn't like, but who knows? Yeah. Like I said, like episode.
Well, Lucas was like depressed and hating life at that time. Yeah, but in terms of like going back and reshooting stuff, I don't think he did that.
Yeah, it's and I guess again, like I've said before, just because these things are being reshoot is no indication of quality. I mean, we have these visual directors like Gareth Edwards, which, I mean, you kind of you weren't even trying, but you'd kind of made me take a more critical eye to Godzilla and realize, mainly the things I enjoy about it are the visuals. It's not the story that's great. And that maybe it behooves Lucasfilm for them to bring in somebody and say, hey, let's craft this story a little bit. Because one of the big problems, at least in my take of some of the, even genre film directors who are like, tend to be the ones I keep my eye on. Cause that's the kind of, I like movies with spaceships. I like that kind of stuff. Oh God, who's the South African guy?
Who did District 9?
Yeah, District 9.
Neil Blomkamp.
Neil Blomkamp. Now, I mean, that guy is a singular visual stylist. I enjoyed the visuals of District 9. I actually think if you kind of ignore the story, Elysium is really like, it's like looking at one of these like 70s issues of heavy metal kind of, like Ringworld. If you read the Larry Niven book, it's like kind of like a combination of Ringworld and Starship Troopers, and with a little taste of cyberpunk. But the story itself is really bad. And even so, and then of course he followed that up with Chappie, which is the robot's amazing, but the story's ridiculous.
Chappie.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And I mean, a guy like Neil Blomkamp, if he had a studio behind him that has done things before, and they said, hey, let's get a writer in here. Let's twist this story. Let's make this story better. And I think that might be a little bit where it's like Gareth might have been. He's more of a visual. It's like he knows that like what works. Let's get little visual cues. The arch of the hallway reminds people of Mos Eisley. One of the two tubes. Aliens has kind of a gray looking. The same thing on his chest that X-Wing pilots have. I mean, these visual cues. I think he's a visual guy. I don't know if he's a great storyteller, and that's not a ding on him. It's very rare that you have somebody that's a fantastic writer and a fantastic director of visual. Not that I'm not picking on Gareth. It's not that, but we haven't really seen him do anything fantastic yet. I think his best work might be ahead of him. Hopefully this is it. It's like I said, I think I'm almost taking it as a sign now that the word is coming that is good, because I mean, look at what's this new Alien movie that Ridley Scott's making? That thing is like, it's so in the bag already that they jumped ahead the release date by 3 months. And wow. I honestly don't necessarily think that's a screamingly great sign of the movie, because it's like, Ridley Scott was so in love with the idea of Prometheus, which I feel was a total misstep in what people wanted to see. And now he's just like, oh, I'm just going to do this one. So he basically gives the people what they want. And then it's like, there's no indication that people are going to love that either. It's like, you're supposed to, give people what they want, but you're supposed to push forward. And, so it's almost like you can kind of read anything you want into these ideas. Like even I go, oh, well, they're working on it up until a week before. That's probably good. And then like, well, Ridley Scott's done 2 months early. I'm like, well, that might mean it's bad. But who knows? Yeah. Who knows? I mean, we don't get to be behind the scenes and all the drama and whatnot. I do know that I think that Riz Ahmed, his character Bodhi Rook, benefited a lot from these reshoots. That I think, I think I mentioned that last week or the week before that it
definitely does seem like they're promoting, or they're putting him out there in interviews and like talking up his character a lot more than they were like a year ago.
Yeah.
As being important to this movie. Yeah.
I wonder if that's going to dovetail back into some of these things that we've been seeing pop up in the comic books, where people are kind of on the outskirts of society in this Star Wars universe are kind of picking sides and whatnot. It's kind of maybe a thematic thing that they're doing. It's like you can't sit on the sidelines or whatever. I mean, it's just the way that they're trying to kind of reframe Star Wars. I mean, that's a lot. Another thing people have said, oh, this movie is going to make you want to watch episode 4 right away, because it's going to completely reframe how you think about the movie, which, I'm not that. I would actually say that would be something that gives me pause. It's like, I didn't know that the last 40 years I wasn't looking at it right, but okay, if you say so. And also, the last thing I'll say about the red carpet thing, Gary Whitta, Chris Weitz, and I forget who else was on the carpet, talking, that Gary Whitta had mentioned that it was Weitz had brought Baze Malbus and Chirrut Imwe to the story. So if we want to at least break down what kind of work was being done, we can know for sure that this addition of these characters were, that maybe this was the idea that they introduced it more as an ensemble piece. Yeah. Which I've been hearing that this is more of an ensemble piece, and that it's... I mean,
that's how they were advertising it for a while.
Yeah.
This is an ensemble movie.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if they've, like I said, they've kind of softened. Soften is a bad choice of words, but they've kind of, again, reframed the Jyn Erso character, at least in the trailers. Like, I think we basically, she went from being in the teasers almost like a Snake Plissken kind of character, like, we don't know where her allegiances lie, even though she says she rebels, but is she a troublemaker? They show her, single-handedly pulling a gun on troopers and fighting them. Nobody else is around. But to now we've gone to the idea she's a leader. She's almost kind of,
right.
If it's almost like as if Star Wars had been written today, how Princess Leia might have been depicted. I'm like I said, I'm kind of, even talking about this now, I am starting to get excited. I'm jumping at the bit. I kind of want to see what I really want to see what they've put together.
No, I'm interested to actually see the thing after spending so much time talking about what it might be. Yeah. I'm ready to see the actual thing that it is.
Yeah, and I think I think at least at my point, it's like, what is this? Now this is our 8th Star Wars movie, if we're not counting the Ewok movies. And, anticipation is like one of those things where it's like great, but expectation of what you think you're going to see. It's like you never end up quite getting what you think you're, when I was going to episode 1, like that is not what I was expecting, Now for good or bad or indifferent, it's Star Wars, and I accept it as such. But it's like, when you come into these things, I think it's better just to be like, hey, let's just hang back and see what happens. Although not getting that blast of Star Wars with the crawl, it's gonna be weird. It's gonna feel weird.
Yeah, it's definitely gonna be different.
Yeah,
that is true.
So I think we've beat that reshoot stuff right into the ground. Yeah. Do you want me to do a little bit?
Hopefully the last time we hear people talking about reshoots.
Until the Han Solo movie.
Yeah. So we've also this was on Entertainment Weekly, I guess one of the they're still putting out content. They're still churning out that old content of just a relatively short photo gallery of some of the droids and creatures that we will see in Rogue One. I mean, not even all of them, and not even some. The space monkey isn't even in this, which I was a little surprised about. But just some close-ups of some of these character designs. People in the costumes and some of the droids. So I guess we'll go through those. So it's on Entertainment Weekly. If you Google EW Rogue One creatures and droids, you should be able to find it. The first of these is a character named Wynkathu Kyubi or Cyubi. Kyabi. So the first name Wynkathu is like wee teeth, because it's at least the skull is based on kind of a piranha shape, and he has very tiny, sharp teeth. So this is Warwick Davis's character in this particular Rogue One. I mean, they're basically putting him in every Star Wars movie now for as long as they can, and he's playing various characters. So he's going to be a member of Saw Gerrera's team, and so he's kind of this kind of roundish head with these kind of beady little eyes and a fish mouth kind of thing, but hair and a beard. I think it's interesting. You can't really see it very well, but there are these kind of ridges that go around the back of his head that look kind of interesting, at least from this angle. And then, you get to see kind of a close up of the costume they gave him, which is very kind of Ghostbusters-y, as we've talked about before. And then, a good or an interesting job on the creature hands, very kind of wrinkled. The fingernails look real. So what do you think about this creature, this character that Warwick Davis is playing, this design?
I like it. I mean, it's definitely something that where they kind of, when they've had smaller characters, Jawas and Ugnaughts and whatnot, but honestly, there hasn't really been anyone since the Jawas that were kind of like getting to do action beats. Even in like the prequels, there were really no smallish characters. Everybody was a kind of a certain. They didn't use the CGI to like there's a lot of people at the. They
made really tall creatures and some like fat creatures, like a fat Twi'lek. But they didn't they didn't do that. And I guess the Force Awakens, they had in the cantina, they had some like small insect kind of looking things, but those were completely CGI.
Yeah, this kind of reminds me of a very high-end take on like a lot of episodic 70s television kind of like I wouldn't necessarily see something as detailed as this, but like a little person inside a costume in like an episode of Battlestar Galactica or something like that. It kind of I and like I said, they've gotten so good with the makeups, which I think are silicone now instead of latex. And, it's, I guess Warwick Davis is saying he couldn't really see out of this very well, but I mean, it's like I said, he's in some ways, he's a good luck charm to these movies and has been since, 83. So, I mean, it's good that he's in there and we know he can work in these kind of costumes. Yeah.
Right.
If there's anybody
No, I mean, it is. Go ahead.
No, if anybody's going to be able to make this his own, it would be Warwick Davis, and hopefully, like I said, I felt a little cheated by Force Awakens. We had the great Crimson Corsair and the guy that was Bazine Natal's kind of paramour, at least in the Maz Kanata scene, turning out to not really have any point of the. Like I said, the whole sequence of her cantina was cut so fast, or done in that kind of sweeping shot. I didn't get the same kind of excitement as even some of these images we've been seeing so far.
Yeah. I mean, it's no. I mean, I think it is a very particular kind of skill to be able to act and give life to a character when you're in all of this prosthetic stuff and, basically a whole head mask and everything else, it is, those things get hot in there and you can't always see very well. And then you're supposed to like act and maybe in this case, have some action beats, like you said. And so, having someone like Warwick Davis who has done it before and knows how to do it, and is, that is kind of a bonus that they get to have someone like that do a character like this.
Yeah. Remember Silas Carson? He played a lot of the Nemoidians.
Oh yeah, Silas Carson.
And they did see all these like videos of him like having to put on these enormous like Nemoidian Trade Federation guy heads, and it was like when it was all said and done, they couldn't even move their arms basically. So yeah, it's. I think we've come a long way in being able to make these people look more real.
Yeah, and I mean the technology. And the prosthetics and everything, I'm sure the technology has improved to the point where they can make these things a little smaller, right? They don't need to give all of their, kind of animatronic characters crazy hats in order to hide the animatronics anymore. At the same time, yeah, I mean it is still a challenge, and so yeah, it's. I don't think this will be a huge part because I mean he was in The Force Awakens and it wasn't. I mean he was just a background character essentially. Right. But yeah, it is. It's nice that he's still around and he's still able to do stuff like this.
Still around. He's like a year older than I am.
Yeah, I know. Well, he's still around in the sense that like they're keeping him in the Star Wars area, right? It's not, and it's to the extent of like Anthony Daniels insists on being around Star Wars as much as possible, but he's like, if you're going to get Anthony Daniels, it's going to be C-3PO. And if you are not going to have C-3PO, there's not really a need to put Anthony Daniels in your Star Wars movie. I mean, I guess they did in episode 2.
Right.
But, it's like, okay, well, if you're going to get Anthony Daniels, he's going to assume it's to be C-3PO and he's going to get, that. But with Warwick Davis, you can have, right, he was never... I mean, he was kind of personally identified with, was it Wicket? He was Wicket, right?
Yeah, he was Wicket, and only because...
But he's gone on and done all of these other things, so that's not all he is identified with, and so, yeah, we'll just bring in Warwick Davis to do any random character that we want him to be. Like, it's nice that they have that flexibility and that, he's happy to, like, do whatever character they want him to do, and that means they can design all kinds of like new and interesting creatures that, yeah, we'll get Warwick Davis to play this guy, great. Whereas, you know, someone like Anthony Daniels or Peter Mayhew or someone is like, well, if we're gonna have Peter Mayhew here, it's for one particular reason, and that means we have to use this character.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, when are we gonna put Warwick in, you know, let him have his face? But then I realized he's actually in episode 1. His
Oh, that's right, he is.
Yeah, he plays basically, you know, he doesn't wear a mask. He has kind of funny hair, but he's one of the peanut gallery during the pod race and sitting in Sebulba's viewing box or whatever. Not Sebulba, Watto's box. But yeah, like I said, it's anytime you got somebody from the original, you know, trilogy in these movies, I think it's good for the spirit of it. It's so funny though to realize that, you know, he was only kind of hired to be a background character, and it was just so happened that Kenny Baker had been sick that week that they were going to film that sequence, and Warwick was about Kenny's size, so he fit right in the suit, and that's kind of how his career started. A lot of people forget about him though. He was, you know, forget about Willow. I mean, he was a lead, but that movie's like always out of print for some reason. Every time,
gee, I wonder why.
Well, yeah, it's not the best. It's not the best movie. It's kind of like a weird cousin to the original Star Wars movies in some ways.
Yeah.
Do we have?
So
sorry.
This is Weetief.
Weetief.
Anything else to add on? Oh, I had another question for you.
Okay.
Regarding Weetief. Do you find the zippers on his costume distracting?
No.
Okay.
I think I know what you're talking about.
Well, this is apparently something that has come up on the Twitter. Specifically, I don't know if it's anyone other than Paul Bateman who worked with
Ralph
McQuarrie for years and did some work on The Force Awakens, and you know, he's kind of in and around the Star Wars community. It's not just this character. There are multiple shots where you see characters in Rogue One with visible zippers on their uniforms, and apparently this bothered him because you've never seen visible zippers in Star Wars before. Like it's been Velcro or they've just kind of hidden. However, the clothes like open and the CLOTHES. How the clothes open and close, CLOSE, right? The fastener, your buttons, your fasteners, your snaps, your Velcro, whatever it is, right? Those have never really been as outwardly visible as all of these zippers are in the Rogue One. Apparently, other Lucasfilm folks have been kind of playing it down and been like, well, there's a scene in Empire Strikes Back, you know, where Luke is in the med bay and he's clearly like zipping up his flight suit, but you know, then you don't see the zipper on his uniform later, I guess was Bateman's point. So I don't know, like I didn't know if this at all registered with you, or because I mean I had noticed the zippers, I guess, but been like, oh, I guess this uniform has zippers on it. Like it didn't. It never registered as like a thing to have to like question or be like, oh, I wonder why they made these zippers visible. I don't know if that's like a new.
Well, you know, I will.
Or if that was just like, why spend the money to add an extra flap of fabric to cover up the zipper? You know, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess on some level I have to like doff my cap to Paul Bateman for even noticing, because I mean, I think it's important that people pay attention to these things, and that, you know, if you're doing a critical assessment of Star Wars, which we do every week, these kind of details do matter that they're noticed. I don't know if they matter whether they're being utilized or not. I don't have strong opinions about zippers in Star Wars, but now that they've pointed it out, it kind of does make me go back and like I'll be looking for zippers and whatnot. I mean, you could make all kinds of comments about, you know, the differences in the variations about the way costumes are constructed in these trilogies. I mean, you go back to even, you know, A New Hope, and I keep saying this over and over. It's like every time I watch that, I remark at like, how inconsistent the stormtrooper costumes are, like how much wear, like when Luke goes in to open up the cell block, like the belt that holds his stuff together, it's like you can see it's actually being patched with gaffer tape. It's so I mean, I appreciate that people are noticing these details. I don't have a problem with it.
Yeah. No, I don't. It's just like, oh, I guess there's zippers now, but I don't think anything beyond that. So the next, or unless you had any parting
I'm good
for Weetief. Okay. So the next next character in this photo gallery is K2SO, about whom a lot has already been said. This is Alan Tudyk's character. Neil Scanlon, the creature effects supervisor, says, "Oh, we think he's going to be the next big breakout droid." Which, I mean, I wonder to what extent that like goes into their thinking when they're working on the story or the script, right? On the one hand, you could say it's kind of organic, where like, oh, well, we've always had, some kind of droid. So we'll just put it in, and that way it'll feel like Star Wars. Or you could say, well, in this story, they have to like infiltrate an Imperial thing. It would be useful if they had a former Imperial droid with them to help get them access. So, there's a story reason. Or if there was like a cynical thing of like, oh, people love the droids, let's make sure we put a droid in here so that we have like a new droid for people to like. I kind of feel like that's how it was with BB-8 a little bit. I mean, although I think part of that was this will be somewhat of a recurring theme talking about these characters. I think that was part of like JJ Abrams' creative decision-making process of like, yeah, there are droids in the previous ones. Let's make the next big droid, the next big hit droid that, people will fall in love with. What's the next iteration of R2-D2? And I don't know if that was the case with K2SO of like, oh, well, let's make the next hot new droid, or if it was like, well, it would make sense that in the context of this story, there would be this former Imperial droid here. The character itself, I don't have a whole lot. Like, it looks fine to me. I do like the little gold or yellowish edge around the kind of shoulder sockets. I always like that kind of touch because it kind of breaks up the design a little bit. But we and others have talked so much about K2SO already. I don't have much to say beyond that. But I mean, do you think this was like kind of a conscious like, hey, let's come up with the next big new droid, or do you think this was like, well, we made a droid, and yeah, if a product of that is that people like it, then great. But if not, then it just seems weird that the way he said it is like, we're all hoping. We really think he's going to be the next big breakout droid, and it was a passion of Gareth's to find this character. Yeah. It was like, okay, so how much of this was like a cynical, calculated, like, let's create a new droid to sell stuff,
right? I mean, I like the design. I will say that this is kind of a culmination of which. Okay, now we did have prequels with three movies of killer droids or whatever, but. I was never a big fan of, except for the droidicas, the ones that spin. I was never a big fan. Yeah, the destroyer droids. I was never a big fan of any of the droid designs, the new droid designs in the prequels. And I think this is a real, this is a combination of a droid that we see is going to fight, because I've seen little snippets that it's a battle droid. It fights. It's not a thing where it's like, oh, it's against my programming. All I do is, talk to the computers or whatever. So this, I actually saw some versions of, I actually have my Black Series 6-inch K2SO here on the desk. Some versions of the packaging, it came with a gun. Mine didn't. So I don't know if that's either indicative of a change in the movie or just a packaging variation. But, I think that K2SO seems like this is an opportunity for a droid to be more integrated into the team, and it actually speaks. Whereas, like a C-3PO was like much more of a kind of like a complainer or whatever, or right. He was a object of, even right. In our beloved Empire, it's like him getting blown up or knocked over or shut up by Han Solo. He's a slapstick. He's done for physical comedy. I think that, in R2-D2 as much goes off and does his own thing, and kind of more of a bratty teenage kind of droid. But yeah, I think the lines I've heard of K2SO is like a lot of cynicism, a lot of matter of fact, kind of almost a person devoid of social, almost like, I don't like it doesn't have social cues because it's a droid or whatever. It might actually be a thing where it's like, people really loved, what's his name? Drax the Destroyer in Guardians of the Galaxy, because he was like, he didn't understand metaphor. He just spoke straight. And I think that's kind of a little bit of what we're getting here with K2SO. It's like, things like, oh, we're probably not going to survive this, or, I'm going to help you because I've been told to, that kind of thing, where it's a lot of comedic stuff. But I mean, the design itself, I would have loved say an IG-88 droid, but if you actually look at the IG-88 droid, I don't think there's a convincing way to animate it in live action to like kind of do what they want it to do. It's like basically IG-88 looks great in drawings and comic books and as a toy. I don't know how well it would actually work so I think in some ways this might have been a compromise in design, picking someone that looks more explicitly humanoid, but then not, they change it and it's got, he's got a very small torso, but very long legs. And I don't know what that means, if that's actually appropriate. And, we have if there's going to be something about the story that he needed to be tall or whatnot.
Yeah. Well, I imagine that the forthcoming Art of Rogue One book is going to devote we're going to see a lot of, old or unused K2SO designs. Yeah. Especially if, as Scanlan says, this was kind of a priority for Gareth Edwards. He really wanted to find kind of the right look for this character, the right personality, and the right look for this droid. I'm sure they went through lots and lots of sketches, and so it'll be interesting to see how those evolved over time, and from, okay, let's put a droid in here, to, okay, now Gareth Edwards wants it to do something, or like this latest version of the script, the personality is slightly different, and so maybe let's make him a little ganglier, or something like that. So we'll be looking forward to seeing how the look of the character evolved over the different months that they designed it.
Yeah.
So the next droid in this gallery is C2B5, which is basically just an Imperial astromech droid, kind of a black and silver astromech, R2D2 looking thing. We've seen, these kind of black and silver, black and gray Imperial astromechs on Rebels a fair amount last, this season, and also a little bit of the previous season. So seeing one of these, at least, for me, was like, yeah, okay, of course they're putting these in there, right? They need droids on the Death Star. We've seen the Imperial versions of protocol droids. Certainly, it makes sense that they have Imperial versions of these astromech droids. I don't know. It does sound like they, Scanlan says they gave a lot of thought to making changes to the R2 units while staying within the protocol of what's been established for these astromech droids. So it sounds like there are maybe a few differences between how C2B5 looks and R2D2, but I'm sure the Astromech Builders Society, or whatever they're called, could take one look at this and tell me like 50 different things that are different. But to my eye and to people watching the movie, I'm sure they're gonna be like, oh, look, it's a black R2D2. That's really all I have to say.
Yeah,
I don't think it's
right on the money for my take on it too. It's kind of like, I like to consider myself knowledgeable, but then I bought my Black Series Stormtrooper helmet for a decoration in my basement Star Wars-ish room, and I'm reading like, well, even though this is not even screen accurate, and I'm like, what? It looks real to me.
Right.
Of course, then I've looked at really crappy Halloween masks 15 years ago and thought, that looks pretty good. So obviously I'm never going to get a job in the model shop at Lucasfilm.
Yeah. So the next slide is Moroff. Two examples of this creature were just seen in Dr. Aphra #1. Moroff has been seen in some of the trailers, I think, and became kind of a big hit. Kind of like a slightly friendlier looking Wampa is how I would put it. Maybe not, none of the horns or anything, but that kind of long white fur. I know it's kind of hard to see a lot with this design, just because it's basically long white fur and with a breathing mask and a chest thing, and so unless you really zoom in, it's kind of hard to get a handle on that breathing mask, and then when you zoom in, it gets a little blurry. So then he's wearing a pack on the back, but it's behind him, and there's a belt like a leather belt. The one thing I think is a little weird, like I'm still not sure how I feel about this Gatling gun thing being in Star Wars. Like that just feels like it just looks too much like a real world Gatling gun kind of thing, that I'm like, so does it still shoot lasers, or how does that work?
Right.
And why couldn't they have just given him like a big rifle? Like, I guess I don't know. I'm sure the back end where you hold on to it, the grip or whatever looks different, but at least just the barrel of this thing, it just looks like they took, some long metal tubes and some discs and made it look like a Gatling gun. And I'm still not sure how I feel about having the look of that in Star Wars, but that's me. I don't know what your thoughts on this character
Well,
are.
I mean, since everything, in the past, again, the original trilogy, most of the early weapons, at least in Empire and A New Hope, were based off of real guns. I mean, they were real guns. The hero versions of the blaster was a cut down Mauser, and the Stormtrooper rifles were, I forget what, I think they were English World War II era machine guns that, but what they would do is they would add a lot to it. They would reconfigure the barrel. They would cut down the stock. They would actually, if you hold them side by side, you go, you can see they changed this a lot. Like, say, like even the early days, they were all working. They would shoot blanks for the hero shots. But, the thing about Star Wars is you can always retcon, and the visual guide will be out, I'm sure, the same week as the art guide, and it'll explain, like, his thing shoots blaster bolts 10 times bigger than a regular gun, and that's why he has a backpack, and it's connected to a power source, because he's so strong. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how they utilize this character, because you do have this issue where when you have a very bulky, hairy character and you use a tall person, and generally when they use these tall people, they're usually tall and thin, so it becomes because they might want him to do something athletic. And if you're just a really big 6 foot, I don't actually know how tall. If this person's like 6'7" and 350 pounds, they might not be as lithe or whatever as a skinny person, but it might show. And then you end up with that effect of have you been to either of the Disney parks like in the last 15 years?
It's actually been like 17 years.
Okay.
Since
Did you ever go when they have the Muppet Show?
Oh yeah, the Muppet 3D Adventure.
So when the guy comes out as Sweetums or whatever,
yeah,
like that kind of cartoonish walk. They always get some actor to come out in a costume to do a live action bit of this ride, and I always think like they have that kind of weird thing where it's like you can almost see it's like, oh, it's a skinny guy with a lot of bulk on him, and he's trying to like overcompensate. And I'm like, that tends to be the problem. Like Des Webb played the Wampa in Empire, and they immediately had trouble with the costume. They couldn't get a convincing gait out of this thin guy that had stilts on his feet. And if you ever go onto the DVDs or the Blu-rays or whatever and watch the deleted scenes, it's like they have this very very embarrassing aborted Wampa sequence from the Echo base that they attempted. There was a whole subplot about Wampas were, the Empire's coming one way and the Wampas are infiltrating the base another, and they were going to try to draw up some tension. And it just it's like so hilarious. They he falls over. And it's like, obviously they wouldn't put anything like that in this movie, but it's like, is he going to be stationary? Did they get somebody that could actually move in a realistic way? I hope so. I hope it's just not one of those things where it kind of looks like Sweetums from the Muppet Show, kind of like guy in a suit, over compensating for the heft of his costume.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I know. That's a tall order.
I guess
that's a tall order.
But... Well, because then you've also got the hair swinging back and forth, and how I guess we'll see if it looks cumbersome, if he kind of lumbers around, if he's supposed to be kind of lithe and agile. I mean, he's got that pack on his back, so I would imagine that they'll have him kind of move a little slower, or kind of lumber around a little bit, and in the movie attribute it to, he's carrying this heavy pack on his back, and then so he's not very mobile. True. But it could be that it's the costume doing it, and they put the pack on him to kind of explain the effect of this kind of slow moving creature, I guess. Yeah,
I mean that would be a fair explanation. Yeah. I did almost buy one of him. I was at a store and I was going through the toy section. And they had that in a two pack with another character, and I forget. I almost bought it, but I'm like, dude, no more Star Wars figures for a while. my office is getting a little weird. I bought a Greedo the other day, and I'm like, no more figures. And then I was at a Half Price Books, and somebody had a Greedo for half price, and I'm like, well, I love Greedo. So that was my one purchase for the month.
Yeah. I'm still waiting for the Constable Zuvio figures to go down in price. I really think once they hit $6 or something, I'm gonna get just to have one.
I still have seen them for $22.
I know their prices are going down. I'm so disappointed. Because to have a thing and have people who's this, and to have to go through the whole explanation. Well, it's funny you should ask about Constable Zuvio here. But yeah, I'm not going to shell out $20 for a Constable Zuvio. No. But if I can get one for not very much money, I probably need to wait a couple of years, for the episode 7 stuff to die down, and
the Constable Zuvio fire sale.
Right. Yeah. So the next creature on here is Benthic, who is the eggmate of Edrio Two Tubes. So Two Tubes, people have seen this as the character with a breathing mask with 2 tubes coming out of the breathing apparatus. So this, a couple things. First, seeing this character up close, there's some really interesting costume choices here. So for instance, the shirt almost looks like one of those puffy shirts that Seinfeld yeah. It's not puffy, but it looked like it has that kind of ribbing, or the material looks similar, kind of a frilly, loose fitting, puffy shirt. And then over top of that, he's got some kind of I don't know if this is supposed to be a jacket or a sweater kind of thing, but with the shoulders cut out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, I don't know, overall the effect is, it's not quite feminine, but it is kind of it's not like the Han Solo shirt and a vest and military pants and whatever. It's kind of an interesting, and then this jacket sweater thing is this kind of lilac-y light purple. And then it's not quite a scarf, but there's netting or something that goes around his neck, or her. I don't know what this character is. I guess the EW synopsis of Benthic says his face. So, and then the exposed shoulders, I think these are supposed to be shoulder pads, and they kind of look almost who was that? Sarko Plank, the helmet that Sarko Plank was wearing in The Force Awakens. It's kind of that similar look to it. And then the the head of this character now, it for some reason it reminds me of like a Farscape character in some ways, and Farscape I don't think ever had those kinds of like breathing masks on any of the aliens that I can remember.
Yeah, it's been a while.
But in terms of like, maybe not even Farscape. Well, so the ear things are very similar, I think, to or remind me of the Scorpius, apparatus and his cooling.
Oh, yeah, his
tubes,
cooling
whatever.
tubes for his head.
Right, but then having that big thing in the middle of the forehead, it kind of looks like a stone or a rock or some kind of gem or whatever. Having that in the middle of the forehead with then some lines drawn around it, some kind of ceremonial markings or something. It definitely kind of looks to me a little bit like like a sci-fi TV show, which is not to say it's bad. Like I'm not saying that to denigrate this character,
right?
And saying like, oh, it doesn't look like a movie thing, it looks like a TV thing. But it is. I think there are a lot of interesting design choices in here, and then you see I don't know if these are gloves or just its hands. I guess they're gloves. It's wearing these black gloves with these kind of segmented, armor or guards along it, but it looks like almost bone or like a skeleton, kind of like an exoskeleton kind of thing.
What do they call that stuff? Chitin? Like
yeah.
Bugs have chitin in their shells.
So I don't know. There's something. I mean, it is a lot. Like it's almost over designed. Like there's almost too much going on with this costume and character design. But I don't know. I think it works pretty well as like a very like the more you look at this character, you find more interesting things to find and to remark on, to notice.
Yeah, I mean, over designed is a fair criticism but it's like I will take over designed over some of the like I said.
And then like he's got this thing hanging around his neck that almost I guess is supposed to maybe, I don't know if that's supposed to be like a macro monocular macro monocle or something, but it looks like the cap from a like from an old camera, or like they took a light bulb, some kind of weird light bulb and did something to it, and it's like hanging on this lanyard around it. Like I don't know, there's just really
he was in film school before the Empire took over his planet.
Exactly. Like just these just these touches, and it's like, oh well, there's this thing, and there's this thing, and there's that thing, and and look at the eyes, and look at the forehead, and the ears, and the scarf around his neck, and the whatever. So it's I don't know. It's probably just on the side of not being over designed, but it's very close. Yeah. Like I think if they gave him a hat or something, like that would be too much.
It kind of goes to show you this might be the realm of where Gareth Edwards, where his entry point on being a Star Wars fan is kind of. Mm-hmm. He's into the specifics. He's like, I need to understand. I need to have them have all this stuff, and then a story behind it all. The monocle, the gun, the tubes. Why is it? The smoke grenade or the. I mean, I think
I'm sure all of these things, like I'm sure there's an in-story or in-character reason for them to be there, but not knowing those things, it's like, well, why doesn't his jacket have shoulders? Or, why is it, why are his gloves like that? Why is his shirt like that? From the Art of the Force Awakens book, they did kind of decentralize a lot of the design team. So rather than have like one design team that was responsible for costumes and props and vehicles and creatures and everything had to go through George Lucas for his approval. For the Force Awakens, everything had to get approved by JJ Abrams, but the costume department designed the costumes, and the creature department designed the creatures, and it was kind of done that way. And so I'd be curious to know which department designed this. Was this a costume design? Was this a creature design? Like, where did this come out of? And where in that process did Gareth Edwards kind of step in and assert his editorial needs and wants about what he thought would make this an interesting character?
Yeah. Doesn't he have a brother though? I don't think his brother's
an eggmate. An eggmate, Edrio Two Tubes. So I don't know if this is benthic 2 tubes or just benthic. But these characters, I guess we've seen them before in the trailers and everything, but I guess this is the first time that I at least am getting such a close up look at it, and it's I don't know, I like it.
So we can look at the Admiral himself.
Move on to Admiral Raddus, the Winston Churchill of Rogue One, which I feel like is like, I don't know how many lines he's going to have. He's voiced by Stephen Stanton, who does a lot of work on Rebels.
Yeah, he plays Tarkin on Rebels.
Yeah, and various other like pilots and Imperials and whatever. So he's kind of like a greenish blue jowlier Mon Cal.
And he drinks a quart of Scotch whiskey every day, just like Winston Churchill.
Yeah, and as the EW thing mentions, there are going to be a pair of albino Mon Cals in this movie as well. So I appreciate that they're, and as we'll see coming up too, I appreciate that they're taking similar character design. They're taking character designs from the original trilogy and then kind of like riffing on them. Yeah, and I feel like in this they're doing that a little more successfully than Lucas did in the prequels, where he was like, why don't we just have a really fat Twi'lek? Or like, why don't we just have a really fat whatever, or like a super tall thing? And you're like, well, okay. Why don't we give them different colors and shading? And like, this one has a thick pouch under his neck instead of, Admiral Akbar or whatever. Because even on all the Mon Cals in Return of the Jedi essentially looked the same.
Right. They're like, and even in the EU,
they were all pinkish, and they were all
they were all in the old EU. They were all tended to be, because they factored in a lot more in some of the like the Jedi Dark Force Rising or the Heir to the Empire
the
trilogy, and they would have they would always describe them as pink or orange or whatever, and they didn't, and the planet Mon Cal, I don't even know what they called it. They share the planet with another, the Quarren, they're the ones in Jabba's palace.
They're the kind of the squid.
Yeah, squid heads.
Squid thing. Yeah.
Which aren't in this, so it's kind of interesting that they may have decided to kind of adjust that story. But I like it. I kind of like I like the idea that the design of this character. I like the change. I like the idea that Stephen Stanton's gonna they're bringing people in from the cartoons to do the voices, because rather than just having it's actually Tom Hanks, everybody. Right. They bring professionals in to do these voices. I mean, don't get me wrong. I enjoyed the whole maybe I should walk that back. I accept that what's his name? Daniel Craig is
Daniel
a storm.
Craig.
But now every time I listen to it, all I can hear is pissed off, James Bond. It was like that thing where it's like cameos and stuff, like they're supposed to be, they're supposed to be like subtle. You're supposed to find out 5 years later. I don't need to know which, stormtrooper was the guy that produced OK Computer. It's like, hey, wait a second. This is supposed to be for later on. It kind of ruins it if you tell people. And this is a good example where hey, it's not really it's good interior for people that are nerdy about, the names. I mean, it was great. It was great when you found out that David Collins and Sam Witwer and all those guys were voices of stormtroopers, and you did get to hear about this we kind of did a riff on the, hey, have you seen the new whatever? It's something. It's a sight to see. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not against celebrity cameos. It's just I kind of like it when voice. I'm a big fan of voice actors, and I like it when they get real voice actors and rather than just actors using their voices.
Yeah. I will say too, this character, I mean, it's kind of a contrast to the benthic, where it's a very simple costume, right? It's essentially, which is not to say that the costume department didn't put any work into it, because I'm sure they did, and I'm sure this was multiple sketches to get to this point. But you have combat boots, right? Starting from the bottom up, you have just combat boots that I'm sure they bought somewhere. What are essentially cargo pants. And then just a shirt. They're
in a war. They're going to need those
some
pockets.
Kind of shirt, right? But then you just have a plasticky belt, some kind of cod piece thing. That's a little weird.
He's protecting his shrimp.
Yeah. Yeah. Episode 69, everyone. And then he's just got this, like, it's not even a vest, it's just like a thing that goes over his head. It kind of looks like
it's a lobster
when you go to the
bib,
dentist,
man. It's a neoprene
it's a
lobster
bit, right.
bib.
Well, I was gonna say when you go to the dentist and they're taking X-rays and they put that lead vest on you.
Yeah, that needs to be longer.
That's kind of right, but
he needs to cover his shrimp.
That's right. But it is like, but it's very simple, right? There's some texture, some ribbing on the shoulders, but that's it. And then like the bib of it is just this flat thing.
Yeah,
and so it's like it's very simple because I guess they want you to focus on the alien, the hands and the face of him, I guess.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of like that idea of like when they make some mistakes in episode 4 when you see I think the Duros character and they're having a disagreement in the bar and one dude has like these very ornate sculpted hands and the other guy just has human hands and they've never fixed that. It's that kind of idea where it's like you didn't notice it until years later because the way that the heads are so exotic and the deep red eyes. It's like, I think they're probably like, hey, if you're focusing too much on our costume, then we're not doing enough with the head. Mm-hmm. Hopefully. I mean, I get it, we're probably going to see him around that table, in that scene that's been in the stuff. So we might not actually get to see a lot, like a full body shot of him. So maybe they didn't want to expend too much energy on a guy who's just going to be standing around a control center. But right. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. For going to the 2 tubes and all this, there's no zippers. I don't see any zippers, but it might be under the bib.
No visible clasps or snaps. Yeah.
That's a very puritanical view of Star Wars, I must say. It's like it's almost like, we don't have buttons or fasteners. The English.
We don't want to acknowledge that these people use the bathroom
exactly
when they're not on screen.
Exactly. He just moves that little hinge on his shrimp protector. All right, I beat that into the ground.
So the next creature in this gallery is your favorite, or at least as you expressed to be was your favorite. This is Beezer Fortuna. Sharp-eyed fans will spot the similarity in name and appearance between this worm-like fella and the slithery Bib Fortuna, Jabba the Hutt's consigliere in Return of the Jedi. And I mean, it looks like if you kind of took Bib Fortuna and squished the sides of his face in a little bit, and then like the neck got a little melted.
Oh yeah, he's on the subway.
Right? But the eyes and the brow are very kind of Bib Fortuna like. I think it's interesting too that he's carrying a staff, some kind of staff, which there was so much time spent early on when we first saw Chirrut Emwe's staff. So many people spent so much time trying to like figure out what the staff was. Is it secretly like a lightsaber thing, and what does the staff do? And it's like, well, apparently people in this movie just carry staffs around.
Yeah, there's a lot of staffs.
Yeah. So you said this is your favorite. So what do you like about?
When I saw this, like, I don't know if it was I saw it before you sent it to me or that. Like, it's horrifying. This guy looks horrifying. Like he's not a very attractive. Like in the best way possible. In some ways, I feel like they've really kind of, I don't know. It's like they've opened up kind of a weird thing where like when you saw the original like cantina scene, some of those things for like I was like 4. But, subsequent thing, they were horrifyingly scary looking creatures. And that, like, and I feel like we've made them, we make all these creatures a little bit like, oh, they have they look, even though when they look weird, they almost kind of look cute. Like, even the little guy that Warwick Davis is playing is kind of cute in his own way. This guy is horrifying. It's like it disturbs me. Even if I was on set standing next to this guy, I'd be like, I just can't look at you. Cause it looks like one of these, like, it looks like, who's that guy that, I forget his name. He plays, he's super skinny and he plays in all the Guillermo del Toro movies. And it's like, it looks like something that only a guy like that could play because he's very thin and, those eyes, man, those eyes, those horrible blue eyes. And when I say just, I mean that in the best way possible.
Right.
In the sense that I'm like, really, like, he looks like he might have weighed 300 pounds before the war, and he's just been like rapid weight loss. It's like that kind of, he's got loose skin. He looks like a little emaciated. I like the staff only because it's almost like, I kind of wonder if this is a visual joke, because I don't think Bib Fortuna had a staff, but his figure did. And it's like this weird thing where you look at it and you go, well, maybe he did have a staff, but it's like, I just went through a thing when I had to buy, I ended up in my little collecting that I have like 3 Bib Fortunas, and none of them had took me the third one to get the staff. No, I'm looking at pictures. It doesn't look anything like the toy because it's got a weird thing on it, but it's the idea where people always think that Bib Fortuna had a staff because the toy did. Well, now his brother or his cousin or his, stepbrother, which I just love the name Beezer. That's
Beezer. Bib and Beezer.
It's not a very Star Wars.
Beezer and the Bib coming to morning talk radio.
Exactly. It's not a very Star Wars name, but not everything has to be a Star Wars. Sometimes you can push the envelope in a different way. So yeah, I'm kind of hoping excuse me.
You're on board.
I'm kind of hoping this isn't like a one shot, blaster bolt to the face kind of dude.
Yeah.
I kind of hope it's like he gets a line or something. I'm looking.
Well, even if he does get shot, right out of the gate, I'm sure there will be some kind of backstory he's given, and he shows up in the comics or a novel or a short story.
Yeah,
I'm sure there will be other opportunities to enjoy Beezer Fortuna. I mean, especially if he is related to Bib Fortuna, like there are lots of opportunities to now like talk about, when they get together for Thanksgiving and one of them is, they're unhappy with each other's life choices and it adds to tension at dinner. I think, there are a couple of things that I think are interesting and that lead to this, what you call kind of horrifying. I mean, he's standing in sort of 3/4 profile with the neck turned to face the camera, which then does kind of interesting things to the mask or the head of the character and how it looks, so the cranium, it's not symmetric. The right side of his skull is a little higher than the left, and so that creates this like weird effect. And then the eyes, I mean, the fact that he's kind of so squished and so like skinny, the eyes are just like boring into you, and I'm pretty sure those are about the same color eyes as Bib Fortuna, but they, in this photo, they just like bore into you, and you can't like escape the fact that this creature is so, ugly looking. I think it's interesting. There are these little like ear flaps or something. It looks like right at the base of one of the head tails.
Yeah.
Leku. Which I don't recall seeing on Twi'leks before. I could be wrong about that.
I think that they might have.
I could have just not noticed.
I think the design for a male and a female Twi'lek is different. Like, because I remember this when we were watching that episode of Rebels, and it was her father and like I think that they had a different, like the male and the female have a different organization of the way the Leku. I could be wrong about that, but yeah. Was Bib Fortuna wearing like I'm trying to like find a good picture of him because it's like, it makes me wonder. It's like, did he have ears? Because he's kind of has it, but they kind of do it in when they have the shot of Matthew Wood playing him in episode 1, he has ears, but they're much more defined, almost humanish ears.
Yeah.
Michael Carter, he has ears. Michael Carter has ears, but his Leku are so large it's almost completely obscured, and he's in shadow for most of the time, and he has that uneven lumpy head too. So
the only other thing I wanted to say about this costume is that so he's got this kind of dark purplish red cloak on, but then underneath there's this orange and kind of gold tunic or shirt or something, which is interesting because it kind of runs counter to the overall color palette for this movie. So, like with the Admiral Radis, one reason I thought that maybe they didn't just make him a usual pinkish orange Mon Cal is because, the movie is so like earth tony and, dark, blacks and grays and some reds and these other things and dark purples and whatever that we've seen on the other costumes. And so, well, if we make this kind of greenish blue Mon Cal, that'll kind of fit with the overall color scheme. But then, there's just this pop of the bright orange and gold in Beezer Fortuna's costume that it kind of breaks up that color palette, which, you don't want it to seem monochromatic and you don't want it to just be the same things over and over. So I thought that was kind of interesting to see that on this character.
Yeah, it makes me speculate, that kind of that undergarment underneath the robe is very similar to these kind of reddish tones we're getting from, obviously the jumpsuit's very red of Baze Malbus, and then Chirrut's got a red kind of undertone to his thing. It makes me wonder if maybe, I'm still outside the spoiler realm, so I know that in the trailer that there is a rainy kind of place where Baze Malbus and Chirrut are kind of like, I don't know if she goes to a planet and picks those guys up and these guys, and he's there, or this is the original, or if they're all on Jeddah from the beginning. I don't know. It's kind of, this might be an indicator.
Yeah, I mean, Benthic, I think, is on Jeddah. This character certainly looks like someone who might be, one of the travelers to Jeddah.
Okay, yeah, one of the pilgrims. Yeah,
but I don't know. Just having the way the costume looks, I could see it being kind of like dusty, on Jeddah.
Yeah. See, I just thought maybe there was a connection to that group. If somehow this is like a Dirty Dozen type movie, and Cassian and Jin are collecting people, but then we see a lot of Baze and Chirrut on Jeddah. So I don't know. We're kind of like, since I don't know every single planet in the movie, I might just be speculating.
Yeah. And so then the next character is Ulin Musters, who is seen wearing some kind of shackles. I believe this is, the context clues are telling me that this might be the same scene early on where Jin has gotten arrested and then the rebels come and break her out, as seen in one of the trailers. But Ulin Musters is inspired by some kind of creature from Earth's ocean. Yeah, here we go. This rebel fighter who appears in a prison cell. So, you mentioned the Quarren earlier, and I think this character may have been, well, instead of a Quarren, let's have another kind of creature with a similar mouth, but let's come up with something new and different. Because he's got these kind of long tendrils or something for a mouth, basically, and then the hands and the fingers are sort of similar looking in some ways. This character has on a half jacket. The jacket's a bit too small for him, it seems. It's also asymmetric. The right shoulder has some kind of padding on it. The left doesn't. There's a high collar on this costume. It's just brown all the way, right? This is kind of more what at least this color palette is kind of more what I think of when I think of the costumes for this movie. They're just kind of like, all right, just a brown and beige jacket and brown pants and kind of a brownish, grayish, slightly reddish character design. That seems very much in keeping with the color palette that we've seen, the trailers and everything, except for Scarif. But I think that's meant to be like a big change when they get to Scarif and it's this beautiful beach planet.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I don't have a whole lot to say. I think it's an interesting character design. I don't think we're going to be seeing much of Ulin Musters. I don't like this name at all. I don't know what it is. I feel like it's one of those things where it's like they wanted to make a name that sounded like someone's real name or like a real set of words, and like I can't quite figure out the anagram yet, and so it bothers me. And so I'm like, I don't like this name, but that's me.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you think about this?
I think this character is probably a little bit of set dressing. Probably we're not going to get a lot to it.
Which is interesting then that, I mean, it's not totally elaborate, but, they had to spend time making this creature, this costume the head, and they would do that. That is Star Wars, that kind of attention to detail. But like they didn't have to create this character just to be like sitting in the cell next to Jyn when she gets broken out.
Yeah, I will say though, kind of looking at this creature's hands, that I wonder if the actual binders would be able to restrain them for that long. I almost looks like the thumb could slip right out of it. But
oh yeah, yeah, I see what you mean. Interesting.
But I mean, that's what happens when you're dealing with non-humanoids. It's like these binder things that they always come up with. It's like they keep redesigning them. It's like the binders in like when they had them in episode 2, I think, even episode 3. It's like there were big clunky things, and then in like episode 4, when the ones they try to put on Chewie, they're like really tiny. But it's an interesting redesign of that. But yeah, I mean, there's a little half-lit jacket is interesting. I wonder if maybe that they're using these muted colors as kind of a way to denote the kind of the depressive kind of idea of the effect of the Empire on the populace. People aren't dressing in a colorful way. They're dressing in monochromes, not even necessarily because they're part of a rebellion, but because it's just like they're like, we want to, we're oppressed peoples. We're just going to wear like functional stuff because we need pockets, and we're going to use dark stuff because we're not being celebratory. And it kind of like maybe a nice way to kind of amp up the feelings that, if we assume this is going to be on Jedha, like the oppression that the people on Jedha feel, which I think, the trailers have kind of tried to impart, but, or maybe he's military and that's a type of a uniform.
Yeah.
And that's the only side. It's got zipper on it, I think, though. I just don't think he's big. I think he's too big to zip it, though.
Yeah. And then the last creature, it's the farm droid, a loose jointed robot who works on Galen Erso's farm. And it's interesting. It's this kind of, it has limbs, its elbows and knees bend. It's kneeling to fix a different droid, and it's using its hands and its tools to fix some piece of equipment. It's interesting that there isn't just like a jack, like it just jacks into this thing to repair it. It works on this piece of equipment the way like a person would, with its hands and tools. And so we don't get to see the quote unquote face of this droid because it's looking off in the distance. But, here too, you get a difference in color palette where this is where they filmed in Iceland. And so you get these, black and green hills behind it, and then very white, dirty droid, but still, very kind of bone white droid. That I like the shape of the head a lot. And the rest of it's fine. The rest of it kind of looks like a smaller version of K2SO to me, honestly.
Yeah.
The way the limbs are shaped and the chest and the torso.
Yeah, the joints are very similar.
But
yeah, I like the fact that it harkens back to, something that didn't really get to be depicted because the sequences were cut. But this early version in episode 4 where Luke is, he's out working in the farm, and he has Treadwell, which was a droid that not terribly dissimilar. It was kind of like a vacuum cleaner with a like two eyes on a stalk.
Yeah.
And the whole pretense is like, well, as people know, the old sequence is like he's out there working on the farm. He's like, a bored kid. He sees a flash in the sky. He raises his macro binoculars up to look at it. He sees what he thinks is a battle, and he tells his droid, "Come on, let's go!" And then it accidentally shorts out the droid, breaks the droid. So he's in such a hurry, he just leaves the droid and goes to Anchorhead, where he runs into Biggs, and it completely changes the focus of the movie. Now, obviously, these sequences were all deleted. I don't even know if they consider this canon anymore, but it kind of, Treadwell shows up later in the Jawa Sandcrawler, but nobody makes the connection that, like, after Luke left the droid, the Jawas stole their droid. But it creates a reason why they needed new droids. And I just kind of like that this is almost like, well, they say in here that it's from the farm. The character alerts him to the arrival of the Imperial troops, which in some ways is kind of like a droid would have, if they'd still had Treadwell, he would have let them know, hey, you got Imperials coming, that kind of situation where it's almost like this analog kind of thing to the Lars homestead, which I kind of like. Mm-hmm. It's like a visual continuity.
Yeah. So that's these creatures. So you expressed to me that overall you think you've liked the designs and everything from Rogue One a lot more than The Force Awakens.
Yeah.
You want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, I mean, like I said, I wasn't super happy. I wasn't super happy with that Maz Kanata's castle sequence. Partly because I think that was it was an excuse to throw a lot of people, like contest winners and fabulous, famous friends. It's like you can see, what's his face, the guy from 30 Rock, and his costume design, it's just grease on his face or something. It's just, they didn't do a lot. They didn't utilize it. There wasn't a it's easy to go, well, 6 Star Wars movies in, it's really hard to surprise people. And it's like, well, no, it's not, and again, it's the cop out of the Maz Kanata castle when Han basically tells them, don't look at anybody kind of situation. And they're never in any danger once they walk in there. It's like within 2 seconds, she's calling out his name, Finn goes over and negotiates with people. There's not even a thing where it's the idea where they get harassed while they're there. It doesn't feel like there's any danger to the thing, even after what Han says. And then, the best character from that sequence is leaving when they walk up. That robot, the one that's
yeah, it's a great robot.
And I'm like,
great droid, excuse me.
It's walking away. And that's the only interesting guy. I mean, like you said, we like the Crimson Corsair, but it turned out to be, I never read that short story. Did you?
No, I didn't. I think it was for younger readers.
Oh, okay, yeah. So it just didn't fill my mind with wonder. And it's like, even now I look at these characters and I wonder, what's that for? What's that for? What's he gonna do? And which is kind of where we had felt when we had seen The Force Awakens, when we saw that they were going to have these characters. And then it turned out to be kind of more of a, the editing, whether the editing or the scripting, it kind of underwhelmed. I mean, not to say that, the Bazine Natal short story, A Perfect Weapon, I thought was pretty good as a one-off. It was interesting, but that's not that was a story exercise, not a visual thing. And so, yeah, I'm just much more heartened with the, zippers notwithstanding, the attention to detail of these things. It feels much more integrated. Now, of course, we are in this idea where, JJ Abrams was incumbent on him to show the change of 30 years. It wasn't, it wouldn't have made sense if everybody was kind of wearing dirty, X-Wing,
right,
flight suits and stuff like that. So maybe I'm being a little unfair, but I think in JJ.
Yeah, I mean
Please go
ahead.
Go
ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, I mean, I think, they were kind of starting at different points, right? Where JJ Abrams was like, okay, episode 7 comes after episode 6. So they were kind of taking what Return of the Jedi looked like and projecting it, 30 years into the future. Whereas here, I mean, they're kind of saying, okay, well, what were all of the crazy things that we had never seen before in A New Hope? And how did that, how can we add to that? I mean, and JJ Abrams, also certainly drew off of A New Hope too. But I mean, I think, that one droid that was walking away from Maz Kanata's castle that was, operated by the performer on stilts. That was a really neat design. The Crimson Corsair was a neat design. I like the Sarcoplank design a lot.
Yes.
The Tito was fine, and the Lugga Beast was fine, and I think a lot of them were fine. I think a lot of the designs were, to bring this full circle, were similar. I thought they, at least they hit me similar to this Weetief character that Warwick Davis is playing, where it's like, yeah, it's it certainly looks like a Star Wars character, or feels like a Star Wars character, but it's not like the most memorable design. I wouldn't say, it's just sort of your basic weird alien looking thing with a weird face and a lot of hair all over the place. There were a lot of those kinds of characters in The Force Awakens, and even in Maz Kanata's castle, which is supposed to be like the cantina scene from A New Hope, where like, yeah, go nuts, any kind of thing you can imagine is there, and even things you couldn't possibly imagine are there. I don't know that we really got that. We got like, all right, here's some insect looking things
playing cards,
here playing, yeah, it's. I feel like, and it could be right that they're kind of just getting all of the apparatus cranked up. They're warming up their creative juices, and now that they've done that, they can keep pushing further and further, because it's a lot of the same design folks working on. Some of the Force Awakens folks rolled over to Episode 8. Some of them rolled over to this movie. So there is overlap in design teams. But yeah, I mean, I don't know how much I don't want to ascribe too much of this to the respective directors, but I mean, I think it would not be inconsistent with the rest of his work to say that maybe JJ Abrams doesn't, his creative impulses aren't like the most out there, like left field. He's very like, they're safe in some ways, right? Like,
yeah,
all right, let's make a Western in space, but like, everyone just kind of looks like they're in a Western in space. Or let's make this Star Wars movie, and instead of coming up with a new Twi'lek design, or instead of coming up with a new Mon Cal design, let's just put Admiral Akbar in there. Like, let's just get the guy from the other movie and put him in there, rather than trying to like riff on what that different version of that creature. So yeah, I mean, there are some creature designs in The Force Awakens that I like a lot. And some of those interesting creatures too, were not necessarily JJ Abrams' ideas, right? The bird that was pecking at the metal, the like metal eating bird, that was Steven Spielberg's idea. And that's kind of yeah, basically he was like, oh, why don't you have like a bird?
You cut out. I just for our listeners, you said Steven Spielberg, correct?
Yes. Yeah. He showed that sequence to Spielberg, and Spielberg was like, oh, why don't you have like a bird there pecking at the metal? Ugh. And he was like, great. And even that creature, like, it just looked like a regular bird with a big beak, like a vulture with a huge beak or something. But JJ Abrams' creative choices, I think you would say, are solid and do the job for getting these movies made and getting these people interested in these movies. But if you look at this, if you look at The Force Awakens, if you look at his Star Trek movies, if you look at some of the other work he's done, it's like he's not exactly pushing the envelope with the look of any of this stuff.
Yeah,
I don't think. That's maybe other people would disagree.
Yeah,
but.
I mean, and you can also say, he jumped in and he had about 2 years to put this together. It's not like he shepherded the Force Awakens from its
True.
Infancy.
Right.
I think some of the wheels were already in motion before he even joined. And I would honestly, JJ Abrams is like, not to say that. I'm putting a lot of, if it sounds like we're putting a lot of faith in Gareth Edwards before we've even seen the final product. So don't mistake that as now we have Gareth Edwards. Cause I mean, this is his take, and I'll probably have complaints about, some of his takes on stuff, and he's a one and done as well. He's not going to be returning, even in a producer, format, even though he has said that he'd love to do a Obi-Wan Kenobi movie, but I don't actually think they're going to make an Obi-Wan Kenobi movie.
No, I don't either.
Yeah, I mean, even down to the first shot of The Force Awakens, it's like, it's been 30 years. Okay, it hasn't really been 30 years, but it has been 30 years for some people. That just, I still take issue how much I didn't enjoy that. Like, that's your response to the Star Destroyer shot from A New Hope is, it kind of cutting into a moon, like that kind of weird knife into the moon.
Shooting it from below instead of above.
It didn't really give a great sense of like majesty and scale to me. It made everything look very small. But whatever. That's obviously it's been a year, and my opinion on that movie has always been changing. It's like sometimes when I came out of the theater thinking it was the best thing ever, and as time's gone on, I'm like, I have a lot of problems with it. But by no means is it. I call it a loss or a mess like some people have.
But I think there were plenty of times where he basically said, "Let me take someone else's creative decision and flip it on its head." Yeah. Right. And that was kind of his creative decision. And yeah, it feels like maybe in this one, Gareth Edwards was like, all right, what is my stamp that I want to put on this? What would I want to see? And again, that's probably selling JJ Abrams a little bit short, but I guess, and I liked The Force Awakens and all of that. But yeah, it certainly seems like Gareth Edwards has made some really interesting, or the designers for whatever reason were empowered to do this, or these were the ones that got picked, or whatever else. That there were some interesting creative choices made in the look of this movie and the look of the creatures and the characters and the costumes and everything. So that's good. That's a positive sign going into the movie. I'll say that.
Yeah, I mean, and even down to like choices of location. To me, like Skellig Michael, that's an amazing shot. Like I thought they just made all that in CGI. I mean, turns out they didn't. They went out there. But that really is only the really most exciting visual location of The Force Awakens. And now, even the trip, we've got Iceland, we've got the Maldives, which, I mean, just as an aside, I've been playing this Scarif DLC for Battlefront. Sorry, the Battlefront. I get it mixed up in my head. And just that exotic Maldives location. It's like when I first saw it, I was like, "What is this?" It looks like this is wrong. But then the more you see it, now I've played the game and stuff like that, and I don't think they've been very smart about not giving any plot points about this thing. It's like it's so different than anything we've ever seen in Star Wars before. You can't help but be really interested in it. It's just like the sky is almost this electric plasma energy, and I thought, oh, that's CGI. And then I went and looked at pictures of the Maldives. Like, no, that's what the sky looks like there before the sun goes down. Yeah,
I mean that's why they chose it as a filming location, right? It's sort of like Iceland as the backdrop. It's like, wow, so how much of that is, or Skellig Michael, right?
Right.
It's like we pick these places because they're beautiful and they don't look real, but they are.
Yeah, I felt like I didn't get that sense from Abu Dhabi and the north of England, wherever the base was. It's kind of like, oh, well, but maybe that's just, maybe it's just the new hotness, as they say. I'm just excited about new locations when I felt they kind of retreaded the desert complex. Even though Jeddah's a desert, I'm pretty sure we're back in a desert, but...
Well, yeah, that's the thing. I'm kind of ready to move away from desert planets at this point.
But it's a cold desert. That's why everybody's wearing a coat. It's cold deserts. I don't know what that means, or if that's just a nice way to dodge. Why are we in a desert? What is it about Star Wars and deserts that it works so well visually for them?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I get, it is partially, it's not quite a Western. It's like a space Western. Well, there are elements of that. Maybe that's why. So the I guess you want to wrap up talking about Rogue One and then wrap up this half season of Rebels. Do you want?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, so there have been 3 episodes of Rebels since we last checked in, and this one that just aired a couple days ago was the last of this half season, and then the next episode is not going to show up till January. So the first of these was An Inside Man, where Ezra and Kanan are back on Lothal helping Ryder, if you remember him from the one episode he showed up in season 2. So they're helping him, get supplies, steal stuff from the Empire, whatever. They go undercover at a local Imperial factory where Sumar, if you remember Sumar from his one episode, he's kind of instigating these other, Lothal residents who have been conscripted to work in this factory to make shoddy product, defective vehicles, basically, speeders and ATDPs. So their factory has a much higher failure rate than all these others, which then brings Admiral Thrawn in. And Thrawn introduces this kind of accountability, quote unquote accountability. Basically, he says, okay, everyone is going to, the workers themselves are going to be the one testing these things now. So Sumar, was in charge of building this one speeder. So Sumar is the one who is asked to then test it out. Of course, it's faulty. It goes above a certain speed and it explodes and blows up. And so Sumar gets killed. Ezra and Kanan are inside the factory, posing as these workers. So they're kind of trapped there. They can't leave. But then Fulcrum helps them out. And who is the new Fulcrum? It's Agent Callus, which they've kind of been hinting at and around previously. Agent Callus has been kind of helping them out and letting them go. And he says, well, the conversation he had with Zeb, he doesn't think they're all bad, or he kind of, is trying to be honorable. He clearly doesn't like Thrawn and the way Thrawn is working. And, he's been kind of pushed to the side in a lot of ways. He's all the way bumped down to back working at this factory on Lothal. So Agent Callus is the new Fulcrum. And they have some secret plans for something that the Empire has been building. So they escape with these secret plans, and it is essentially the TIE Defender from the old TIE Fighter game, which is the eyeball cockpit with these, the solar panels on the top and then kind of angled down at the bottom on the two sides. So it has these the solar wings. I played the TIE Fighter game a lot, so I remember the Defender. It had shields, and it was you had to get pretty far into the game before you could start flying this thing. And so that's the episode. They find out that the Empire has these secret plans to build a new TIE Defender. I don't know. Do you want to take these episodes one by one, or do you want to go through all three of them and then?
Maybe we'll just do one by one since you did the whole breakdown.
Yeah. So for this episode, for the Rebels recon for this one, they talked to Paulo Hidalgo, and he was like, we were all itching to get the TIE Defender into the show. And even as someone who loved the TIE Fighter game, as soon as I saw it show up, I was like, really? That's what they're bringing back? I mean, it seemed like such a missed opportunity for me, because as soon as they said, oh, it's secret plans for a new TIE, I was like, oh, this is going to be the TIE Striker, and this is going to tie into Rogue One. And it wasn't. It was the TIE Defender. So it kind of threw me off, and I was like, of all the things that they could, secret plans, it could have been anything. It's the TIE Defender. Like it just seemed like a weird choice to me, but this was, they were itching. They've been apparently looking for ways to work the TIE Defender into the show. And so this was their opportunity to do it. What did you, so this episode, it was kind of, with the death of Sumar, it was billed as being maybe a little darker than previous episodes this season. Maybe not as dark. Oh, I'm sorry, I completely skipped the Wynkathu Job.
Yeah,
but well, so an Inside Man, right? So building divisions and voices, which is even darker. But I mean, what did you think of the Inside Man episode?
I mean, I generally liked it. I'll be honest, I've never played TIE Fighter, so the TIE Striker thing, I was just like, wait, don't we have this? I mean, the TIE Defender, it's like, your notes, and you're saying it's a missed opportunity. Why didn't they just integrate this TIE Striker concept that they're selling in stores and instead? But I mean, in some ways, it's a nice bit of fan service. It also reminded me of something that I completely forgot, that generally that they would, in the lore of Star Wars, is that the TIE Fighters were fast because they gave all their energy to blasters and engines and no shields. So like, these guys had a vested interest in being fast and maneuverable, because if they got hit, they were kind of out of it. So that was kind of a nice little nod to the old old continuity or whatever. It was kind of interesting to see Thrawn. They've been so weird about kind of haltingly introducing him, especially with the whole thing that happened on Ryloth, that he was almost kind of not menacing, but he seemed to have a certain code, Thrawn did, and that kind of goes out the window in this episode. I mean, he basically knows he makes somebody commit suicide in front of him as a way to motivate the workers. I mean, that
he's getting serious.
It's kind of interesting. Goes back to goes back to like ideas, the origins of certain aspects of Star Wars in World War II lore about German manufacturing of weapons and the sabotage inside their own facilities and how they were dealt with. So yes, that's very dark for a kid's cartoon. I'm not really criticizing it. I just was like, oh, that's kind of dark. I mean, yeah, it was nice seeing Clancy Brown as writer come back, but I didn't have a great connection to the character. I think you call that Callus was probably Fulcrum, didn't you say?
I don't know. If I did, that was very prescient of me. I don't remember saying,
because I had this whole idea like, it's they're going to put Saw Gerrera in it or something. And I think you brought up Callus, which we had kept on.
Yeah, I may have mentioned it as a potential.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the. Although I don't know if Callus is long for this world, because I get the feeling Thrawn already kind of knows, but maybe I'm just projecting old book Thrawn onto new Thrawn.
Yeah, I mean, I did appreciate seeing Thrawn actually do something and not just like sit there and be like, oh, well, let me watch and see what they do, and then be like, oh, I've learned something, and so that is victory in itself. Like here, he is actually doing something, and this may have been as much for the benefit of people who didn't read the books or haven't read the books yet and don't have any really background on who this character is, right? To show that, oh, he is a menacing guy. Like the stakes are higher now. He would do something like that, right? He really does pose a threat to the rebels because he would basically make this man ride the speeder to his death. So for the people who haven't read the books, it's like, oh, okay, maybe I get now why everyone was excited that this guy is on the show. Right. It's like, oh, because he does that, and that means everything's much more dangerous for our heroes.
Well, he's also now, this has, at least in my eyes, this version of the character, he's completely irredeemable now. It's not like he can, anything that he does that might be like, oh, I respect my enemies and all this stuff.
Right.
It's like, it doesn't matter. You're a cold-blooded murderer. It's not, I don't care about like, oh, well, I have a softer side. So he's more of like a villain. And what, this show needs a villain. It's kind of like, who's going to step up and be the villain for this show? Whereas it's like, if he was like, oh, I respect their art and I learn, I respect the culture of Ryloth. And then you're like, well, why does everybody say that this guy is like, he just seems like it's almost like, like the enemies where they're enemies, but they respect each other down at it's like, no, this is guy, you're going to want this guy to get toasted eventually. It's
right.
People aren't going to be like making a case for this guy being like, I think he should join the rebels. Gosh, I hope that's not gonna, I hope they're not, I hope that isn't what they're gearing up towards. I doubt it.
No, I mean, I don't think Agent Callus is long for the Star Wars universe. I could be wrong about that. And he could go on and have a long and storied history, and maybe they haven't even figured that out yet. Maybe they're kind of stringing this along, keeping their options open. Maybe they've worked that out, and there's an episode later this season that closes the door on it. But on the other hand, right, they keep, as we'll talk about in a second with the previous episode, they keep Hondo around for everything. They keep all of these characters around just to, like, if they need a story idea, oh, let's just throw Hondo in there. and see what he does, or let's bring Maul back again and make him a central player on this show for some reason. I don't feel like they give up on characters very easily, and so turning to the rebellion eventually very well could be an option, if just so that they don't kill off a character, because why would they ever do that?
Right.
So the previous episode, I had not scrolled up on my rundown far enough. So the previous episode, the Wynkathu Job, as just referenced, Hondo is here. The Ghost crew is looking for some proton bombs. Hondo knows where they can get some, but it's on an Imperial ship that was abandoned because it's on some planet that has atmospheric storms. The Imperial ship got stuck in the storm. Everyone jumped ship, and so it's just sitting there full of proton bombs and treasure, apparently. Hondo told the Ghost crew about this, right? Not because he's altruistic, but because he needs their help getting access to some treasure that's on the ship and getting it off the Imperial ship. And so we also find out that this isn't his first time trying to get it. He's been on that ship before. His old Ugnaught assistant is still trapped there and waiting for Hondo to come back, basically. Hera put Zeb in charge of this mission because Ezra is too friendly with Hondo. He trusts Hondo too much. And so the fact that Zeb gets put in charge of the mission and not Ezra annoys him very much, and he kind of sulks and whines through most of the episode. While they're on this Imperial ship, they accidentally awaken Imperial sentry droids, which I remember we saw in the kind of preview trailer for this season. They're the droids that look like the old Dark Troopers from the Dark Forces video game, which I also played a lot. So these two episodes really hit me in the old video game history. Oddly enough, I love Dark Forces. I love TIE Fighter. Did not care for either being referenced in the show for some reason. I saw it like both of them. I was just like, you could have picked something else. Like, you could have come up with a new thing. So the Wynkathu Job ends, right? They barely escape. It turns out that the trunk full of treasure that Hondo thought he was getting off the ship really just had his Ugnaught assistant in it, and so he gets no treasure while the Ghost crew gets their proton bombs. Gary Whitta gets another script credit for this episode. He's done one or two before. I am not a huge fan of the character Hondo on Rebels very much. Like, I thought he was fine on the Clone Wars, but he's an example I always point to of, like, come on, guys, you said you wanted the Clone Wars and Rebels to be separate shows, and yet you keep bringing back Clone Wars characters on Rebels, right? And Hondo was an example of that. But I actually didn't mind him in this episode. I thought he was pretty good. I thought he was genuinely funny in this episode. As Morrigan is also back, he's kind of partnered up with Hondo here. He was the main kind of pirate smuggler guy from the episode with Lando, first episode with Lando, with the puffer pig and I guess he's shown up a couple times.
Yeah, I had forgot about that.
He didn't really do much for me in this episode.
He did something. I forget. There was a joke that he did. It made me actually laugh, which is something I rarely do, and I forget why. But sorry.
Was it? Yeah.
It was that's fine. It was like a gag or something. I mean, I love James Hong. That's the thing.
Yeah.
And it's like, people will know James Hong. I mean, he's been a voice actor and a live action actor, but most people will know him as, he plays Hannibal Chew in Blade Runner, and he plays David Lopan in Big Trouble in Little China. So he's a very distinctive, he has a very distinctive voice, and he kind of adds that. And also, I want to say that as Morrigan, that look, and maybe we've already said this before, but I think he's based off of an early concept drawing of Jabba the Hutt, isn't he?
Yep. Yeah, he is.
Yeah, I think we've talked about that before.
Yeah, so so that's the episode, basically. And like I said, Ezra's just kind of like whiny through most of the thing and complains a lot. The sentry droids, like I said, I wasn't a huge fan of the look of them because I was like, all right, come up with something new. As much as I like Dark Forces, the game, I thought they were a little more intimidating than the destroyers, the droidicas that we saw in the last battle episode. But even then, like the sentry droids never really I don't feel like there was actually any danger of them like being stuck there, that the sentry droids were actually going to like kill anyone. Like they just never really seemed to be threatened by them. They just escaped relatively easily. They certainly added more drama to the escape and kind of meant that they were stuck between the sentry droids and this, atmospheric storm outside. But, I never really thought there was any danger from them. But that's more of like a story or a script thing rather than like that the droids weren't intimidating.
So here's then
AP5 from the season 2 episode where Chopper takes center stage. He shows up and has like 2 lines.
I kind of like AP,
and he shows up again. I don't like him either. He shows up.
Oh no, I do kind of like him.
Oh, you do?
I'm sorry, I don't know why. He reminds me of the late Alan Rickman a little.
He does. He does has kind of an Alan Rickman-y voice. I think that might be Steven Stanton as well.
What was up with Chopper like basically giving him the FU at the end there and like taking off? And can't any one of those guys anybody use the Force and like Chopper's jets to be able to get back to that ship? He just took off on him.
Yeah.
That was a little weird.
I guess they describe him as like a cat kind of, and so they they're always looking for opportunities to make him like irritable and kind of independent, and to show that he's not a subservient droid. He does his own thing, man, and he's just looking out for number one. But yeah, I think they may be pushing it a little too far. And I was correct. Steven Stanton does do the voice of AP5.
Yeah, it's a good voice. I don't know. I kind of like that because I just to kind of assume that now we're not going to be getting. Well, I think we are getting some of it in Rogue One, but these Death Star droids, which is another action figure, I have like 3 of them. Every time I buy like a lot of Kenner figures, I always end up with the Death Star droid, and it's just like I just like that he's kind of a dick. It's just like I don't know, maybe it's because of Douglas Adams or whatever. It's just I like that kind of like you brought me into this world, this miserable world, and then they have that attitude towards people. But yeah, I mean, overall, I think there wasn't that weird sense that there's a lot of danger on the page, but it never felt like our characters were in any kind of real danger. I mean, yeah, it was kind of a shtick episode, and who better to star in a shtick episode is Hondo, who's basically at this point a literary vehicle for them, or an artistic vehicle. It's like, same thing's gonna happen. Ezra's gonna be like, oh no, we can trust him. He's gonna screw him over. It never really. I think there was I think Ezra said something like, or somebody said, "You're not going to trust that guy anymore, are you?" And he kind of like looked at him like, maybe, or something like that. It was just like, yeah, we're going to get a season 4 episode of this. Yeah. But like, I can understand he was not as annoying, and maybe that might be part of the fact that Asmore again would have been more of a kind of didn't really have a point in the story except to be an object of fun.
Right.
But like I said, I think I did laugh once, but which doesn't happen very often on these shows, because sometimes the jokes are a little childish for my elevated sense of humor.
Yeah. Well, it's was it? I can't remember. Oh, I guess it was Inside Man, that episode where, I mean, I think it's true of all 3 of these episodes. Visions of Voices was a little better. And I guess there were some lines in them with Wynkathu Job that I liked a lot, but I also feel like the visuals on the show are just so much further along than the writing sometimes. I mean, there was this line in Inside Man where, it's in the very beginning, they're being chased. They're on these speeders being chased by the Empire, or I guess it's late. They're escaping the factory, right? And they're on this one speeder. There are like 4 of them in the speeder, so it's weighed down. They're being chased by Imperials, and so Ryder goes like, "Think fast thoughts," and then there's like a huge gap in time. Like it's several seconds go by, and just the timing of it's off. And then Ezra goes, "I'm thinking fast thoughts. Nothing's happening," and it's like that was supposed to be like a joke or a laugh line or like a clever, Star Warsy kind of, banter, but it like that's not. First of all, think fast thoughts is kind of lame, and then like I'm thinking fast thoughts and nothing's happening. Like that's not really like banter. That's not like witty in any way. That's just kind of lame. And so I feel like, yeah, I mean the Wynkathu Job. I mean, I liked the previous episode that Gary Whitta has script credit on to the Antilles Extraction or whatever it's called. And so I don't know. Maybe I don't know if he's getting more dialogue into these on his own or what, but I've liked the writing on those a little more, and there are some episodes where the dialogue is just so clunky and just like, yeah, here's a thing that has kind of the rhythm of like a witty joke, but it's not actually anything funny.
Yeah, I mean,
so I mean, so I do take your point, right? The Wynkathu Job, I think, had some actually funny lines. I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Well, the funny thing is I would say that I should have mentioned when I was watching Inside Man, and in some ways it's a good example to contrast it with Wynkathu Job. Such an inconsistent portrayal of Ezra right now, and maybe that's maybe it's been so long since I was like, I still think Ezra's like 15 or 16.
Yeah,
like in my mind, like. He's 15 or 16. Like Hera and Kanan are probably just shy of 40, and Sabine is probably in her early 30s. Like that's the kind of way I think about them in the Zeb, and I don't know what age those people are, but I kind of think it's like, okay, so he's like, maybe it's been so long since that thing, and maybe 15-year-olds are inconsistent, but it's like 1 minute. He seems to know he seems to be able to be someone you can trust his judgment. And then the next episode, it's like, hey, you're being ridiculous here. You're being petty about like, oh, I want to be in charge.
Right.
And it's like, really? And it's like, is that really that important? I mean, you're supposed to be learning something, and maybe that's because they're trying to, maybe it's shades of Anakin Skywalker's unhappiness with the Jedi Council, and they're trying to maybe build that up. So when this Visions and Voices, which Maul comes in, and Maul is constantly saying, "Hey, I can teach you things that you wouldn't believe. I think you may have come to a logical end with your Kanan situation, but." I mean, maybe that's what it is, or maybe they're having a lot of trouble writing a consistent Ezra right now.
I mean, I'm with you. He's just swinging so wildly back and forth from episode to episode, and I guess this is only the midway point of the season, so we'll see how it ends up. But there really doesn't seem to be much of an arc to his character right now, right? It's pretty clear in the Wynkathu Job that they're trying to build up, like, okay, he's kind of torn between his, he's friends with Hondo. He trusts Hondo, even though he has absolutely no reason to. And then, he still kind of trusts Maul, or at least he's willing to go along with Maul. And this kind of back and forth. He wants to be put in a position of leadership. He wants his friends to trust him and put some responsibility on his shoulders because, ultimately he's doing this for them. He's fighting to try to protect his friends the way that he couldn't protect his parents. So like who his character is and where he should be at this point in time and is very, I think on paper, or when you just say it out loud, you go, okay, yeah, that makes sense. But then how it manifests from episode to episode, the Ezra of Hera's Heroes is like completely absent in the Wynkathu Job, and even from the Wynkathu Job to an Inside Man, right? Like Ezra acts completely differently, and maybe that's because he's not in charge. He's there on the mission with Kanan and an Inside Man, and so he's willing to kind of not complain about it. But yeah, it's just there's not like a slow development from one episode to the next of, okay, there's an arc to this character. Here's where he is along that arc. the previous episode he'll be a little lower on that arc, and then this episode he gets a little higher. The next episode he'll get a little higher on that arc, and so on and so forth. Like it's almost like just points on a graph, and that they're just trying to like, well, there's this kind of line somewhere in here, and we're just like, finding dots like all the way around, and they're not actually connected to one another. I really don't. I mean, and the other thing too is, right, they're giving so much time to Ezra, and he is the main character of the show, but I feel like, I mean, Hera and Zeb and Sabine have had so little to do this season, right? Hera got one episode with the Hera's Heroes, and then beyond that, she's just had like a couple lines of dialogue in the beginning, setting out what the mission is, and then someone else goes and does the mission, right? And Zeb was in the lead with Wynkathu Job, but he certainly wasn't, the focus of that episode. And Sabine, as we'll say, like, she has sort of a big part within the broader story to play in Visions and Voices, but like her actual involvement in Visions and Voices isn't that big. And it's like, I feel like this is kind of, I don't know if this is similar to Rogue One or what, but it started off, there's this story of Ezra, but it's also this kind of ensemble. It's a group of rebels, but it really doesn't feel like that to me as much as it used to. It just feels like, okay, here's this show about Ezra, this character who swings wildly back and forth, and no one is really sure which Ezra we're going to get in a particular episode.
Yeah, I mean, and no better, and like maybe this would be a good segue into Visions and Voices. Mm-hmm. No more is it evident in the fact that, okay, so this inconsistency of Ezra, and it seems like a lot of things are put into motion by him. We're going back to your home planet. Oh, your old buddy wants to do a job with you, and now Visions and Voices. Maul is the whole idea with what's going on in the Force or whatever. But again, which we'll John, you'll probably break it down for us. I will say, when we end this mid-season, which at least the way we do things now on television, whether it's Walking Dead or whoever, when they do these half seasons, that it should at least end with a lot of people in this air of like, who's going to be doing what. This thing really only is basically one person. It's like, it's all about Ezra, and it's like, they don't push anything forward for anybody. It's like they don't. It's almost like they don't even exist, and which is kind of strange.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in this episode, it starts out Ezra. They're all being briefed on a mission. Hera's talking to them. Ezra keeps seeing like Maul kind of in the distance or in his peripheral vision. He starts chasing after him. Turns out Maul isn't really there, and he ends up almost like killing some random rebel because he thinks it's Maul, and it turns out it's not Maul. So Kanan is like, all right, I know what to do. I'll take Ezra to see the Bendu. Takes him to see the Bendu, and the Bendu basically is not helpful. He says, I don't even remember what he says, but it's just kind of like generic and like, well, maybe the really is here. And then it turns out Maul really is on the planet, and is there. And then they turn back around and the Bendu's gone. He's disappeared. Right. And so what happened was, when Ezra and Maul, at the beginning of the season, tried merging the Sith and Jedi holocrons, Ezra broke it off too soon, and so each of them has like a part of each other's holocron visions in their head and a part of each other's memories or something in their head. And so Maul was on the planet and kind of using that to, appear in Ezra's mind and let him know that he was there and everything. So Maul's like, hey, we need to fix this. We need to complete each other's respective pictures. I think it is interesting the way it was written, where Maul would say, like, you have something that belongs to me, basically saying that it was his right, it was Maul's right to learn the Sith holocron vision, where for Ezra and the rebels, it was like, oh, and I have something that you might want, right? It wasn't the same. It wasn't, I mean, this is kind of like a subtle writing thing, but I picked up on it, and I thought this was an example of good writing, I guess, from the finale, that, Maul talked about in terms of like, well, this is rightfully mine, and I deserve to know what the Sith crawled holocron was trying to tell me. You don't necessarily deserve to know what the Jedi holocron was trying to tell you, but you kind of want it, so you'll have it. Right. If we make this switch, right? So it was in Maul's mind, it wasn't an equitable exchange necessarily, or at least maybe he framed it that way to like make himself feel better about doing this. Who knows? So Maul takes Ezra to Dathomir, where he has been hiding out. He went back to his home, I guess, living in this cave that has all these artifacts and remnants of his previous life, and including kind of the shrine to, I guess, one of the Night Sisters. I don't know, but he has the dark saber from the Clone Wars, which is a symbol of Mandalorian power or something, right? It's not the dark saber from the EU novels, which was the name of some prototype Death Star laser. It's an actual laser sword that is black. That is the new canonical dark saber. So Maul and Ezra use Night Sister magic to complete their visions. They find out that Obi-Wan Kenobi is very important. A desert planet with twin suns is very important to defeating the Sith. And so great, except now Maul neglected to tell Ezra that they owe a debt to the Night Sisters for using their magic, flesh and blood. As long as these spectral Night Sister spirits don't pass through their bodies, then they're safe. But of course, Kanan and Sabine followed Ezra because Kanan didn't trust Maul. So they had flown to Dathomir. They were kind of hiding. The Night Sister spirits possessed them. And so then they start attacking Maul and Ezra. Maul just takes off in his ship. He just leaves. And so Ezra is left to try to deal with these his friends who have been possessed by the Night Sisters. He's just kind of able to do it. It doesn't really take that much time in the show. He just kind of does. He's able to coax these spirits out of Kanan and Sabine. He destroys the altar by hitting it with both his lightsaber and the darksaber. And then Sabine, who of course is Mandalorian, knows what the darksaber is. She finds it and picks it up and brings it with her on the way out. And that is the end of this half season of Star Wars Rebels. And again, it's like, all right, I thought this was supposed to be a separate show. Why are we getting into this like Mandalorian darksaber stuff? That part was not the most interesting to me. I know images of Sabine wielding the darksaber had kind of surfaced months ago, so I wasn't surprised that it happened. But I'm still like, just make this its own show and leave the Clone Wars be. In some ways, but the big kind of news, the big takeaway here is, right, Obi-Wan Kenobi, his name was actually mentioned. Now that specter has been raised in the context of this show, and so we'll see to what extent that becomes part of the plot moving on. I mean, it certainly seems like both Maul and Ezra are kind of in a race to find him. Or, the vision didn't say which planet. It just said a desert planet with twin suns. Of course, Maul has actually been to Tatooine.
Right.
And so I at least would expect that that's where he starts, because, that's where he's been before. Whereas, the Rebels, they're like, well, that could be any number of places. That doesn't really narrow it down for them the same way that it might for Maul. So, that's kind of the launching point, the jumping off point for the second half of the season 3 of Star Wars Rebels. So,
and weird.
I mean, it was kind of, it was darker and maybe a little more intense because of all the possession stuff and everything. And I don't know so you were about to say.
Yeah, I was going to say I liked it. Yeah, and I thought it was good. But aside from the fact that I kind of wish we had left this midpoint as a kind of a more like everybody had something to worry about at the end of the day kind of situation, which I always think is the best if you're going to have suspense. It's like, let's get everybody invested. Let's find out what's up with Zeb. Let's give him something. But that's not the kind of story they're telling here. In some odd ways, it's anticlimactic because when they early on, when they touched holocrons, it's like, I think you'd have to be a pretty light fan to not realize that when he lives. It's like he's probably talking about Obi-Wan Kenobi. It's like that's the thorn in his side. And them just to reiterate it in some ways, it's like, yeah, we kind of already knew that. So it's like they restated kind of a revelation more explicitly, but they just did it twice. And it felt like a little artificial, like, the possession stuff is interesting, but again, what do the Sisters of Dathomir really have to do with the overall arc of the story? The idea of, I think inside of, his little Maul's little psycho cave, which is, it's a kind of a riff on these movies when they break into the suspect's thing and he's got newspaper clippings all over his wall, which isn't terribly different than in the other episode where Thrawn has his kind of psycho apartment wall with pictures of Ezra Bridger on it and stuff. But Satine is inside Maul's cave, which I think that was. Do you think that was Satine, or do you think underneath the Darksaber, the picture was above it?
Oh, I don't know who that.
He killed Satine was a Mandalorian queen, I think, and apparently in Clone Wars, her and Obi-Wan had a romance, although
her, yeah.
And he killed her as kind of as a FU, like, you cut me in half, I'm gonna kill your girlfriend. And she didn't have the Darksaber, or did she take? It's been a while since I've watched that. So, but again, they're in that Clone Wars miasma of stuff, and it's like you're not pushing the story forward. You're going back into stuff. It's almost like, well, is Dave Filoni kind of saying, like, guys, go check out my other show. It didn't get as much views as I hoped. I mean, I think it was I can't imagine that's what he's really thinking, but it's like, I feel like he's just going to the well too many times. And maybe there's things, behind the scenes where he's got, all the EU guys had these edicts from on high about things that you don't cover. And maybe he has edicts on high he can't cover, that he doesn't want to talk about because, it's just, people won't watch the show if they're like, oh, well, if I'm never going to watch you guys push the needle forward, so to speak, I'm not going to watch this. If it's just like, if it becomes like Ewoks or a thing where every episode is self-contained. Now that's not, we're not really dealing with that problem. I'm just saying that, like, as a person I think it would have been much more interesting for them to have, like, done something where it ended with Ezra and Maul leaving to go after this Kenobi, not go after to see Kenobi or whatever, to unravel the mystery that is the twin sons, which would be a mystery to Ezra, but not necessarily a mystery to Maul. And that, again, it could be the deceit where, like, we all know Maul knows where they're going, but he's playing it off like, totally together, you and I can, which, my problems aside of the story, Sam Witwer's Maul, which is a very different choice than, like, Peter Serafinowicz is taken the voice, but we're talking 5 lines 17 years ago. He's really created a much different character. There's tastes of Malcolm McDowell in the way he does the voice that I really enjoy, because I'm a Malcolm McDowell fan, but I really wouldn't want Malcolm McDowell on Rebels because he's kind of almost become a parody of himself as an actor. But I just like the way he does Maul. I wish they could have actually stretched out this, deception a little bit more, like that he still has that kind of, even though he says he's no longer a Sith, that kind of, like, lying to people to get what you want. And then us knowing, oh my God, Ezra's getting on this ship with him under the auspices that they're going to find this together, when Maul really knows what's going on and what he's going to do and how he's going to fix it by, vis-a-vis killing Kenobi. And he's also going to try to, obviously he's going to try to probably seduce Ezra, into the dark side. And it would have been, much more interesting, in my opinion, I mean, some of the stuff with like, you've disappointed me and all this stuff and the anger. So there was anger, but there's no menace. It's like that idea where you know that at some level Maul still realizes Ezra is going to be useful to him in the future. So therefore there's no real idea that, you know, Maul will go, you disappoint me and then I'm just going to cut you in half kind of idea.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like, you know, going forward in the season, they really kind of set up 3 storylines that may end up intertwining, but you have the kind of Maul, the Ezra Maul thing, right? And, you know, the search is on for Obi-Wan Kenobi, right? And that piece of it, you have Thrawn still lurking around, right? And his deal. And then you have this, you know, Sabine with the Darksaber. What is she going to do with that? And Pre Vizsla is still hanging around, I guess.
Oh, I don't remember.
Right? Is that who that is? Or who's the protector of Concord Dawn? Is that Pre Vizsla?
No, Pre Vizsla's gone. I forget the guy's name. The Scottish actor, or not the guy from that TV show Rome played him. I forget his name.
What is his name?
Kevin McKidd, but I don't know what the.
Hang on, give my computer a few seconds.
Exactly.
Fen Rao. Right. So Radio Sabine and maybe Fen Rao and this Darksaber with, you know, now we're getting into like Mandalore stuff again. And, you know, given that Thrawn, you know, learns about his enemies through art and Sabine is the main artist, you know, it could be that he sort of overlaps with this Mandalore thing, you know, with Sabine. But, you know, that the Thrawn stuff feels more like it's Thrawn versus Hera in some ways, right? And that they're kind of, you know, because she's the leader of Phoenix Squadron, and so that feels like a, you know, a Thrawn Maul thing, or a Thrawn Hera thing, and then you have Maul Ezra, and then you have Sabine doing her thing, and then it seems like Kanan and Zeb are kind of there now. You know, it almost feels like, you know, we're sowing the seeds to see this group of rebels start drifting apart, right? And they're all kind of pursuing their own personal business now, or at least some of them are, right? Like Sabine might start. I know, and they may try to keep the group unified, and they do it all together as a group. But I mean, ultimately, I think if they do that, they're going to come across the same thing they've had this half season, which is, okay, we got a Hera, and in season 2, right? Okay, we got a Hera episode, and then she has like 5 lines total in the next 2 or 3 episodes, right? We get the Sabine episode, and then we don't see her for 2 more episodes, right? That where it feels like they're just touching on each of these stories one at a time rather than incorporating them all into one whole arc. So yeah, I mean, we'll see where this Darksaber thing goes, and you know, maybe that plays into Ezra, and Ezra is torn between wanting to help his friends, meaning help Sabine and her Mandalorian whatever, while at the same time, you know, wanting to pursue Maul or pursue this, you know, desert planet with twin suns idea, and at the same time having to protect his friends from Thrawn, right? So maybe that'll be a chance to see Ezra pulled in these different directions, but it doesn't feel like they're doing that, right? It doesn't feel that overarching and that comprehensive. It feels like, well, we just kind of are setting all these different things in motion, and we'll address them at random times throughout the season in between Hondo episodes, right? And then, oh, by the way, Rex is here again, even though you haven't seen him for 6 episodes. Yeah. So, yeah, it just feels like this would be, you know, if this were a group of real people, this would be where they maybe start drifting apart. And I don't know if we'll see that on the show.
Yeah, I mean, it would be more interesting. I think it's like we kind of need Ezra to almost like have a more clearly defined focus about what he's doing. Is, you know, what is Kanan and Ezra's endgame as Jedi? You know, there's been talk of like, oh, you know, we're dealing with stuff where we probably shouldn't be around you guys. But I mean, as at some point, since they're Jedi, you know, although they're non-traditional Jedi, you know, it's kind of like back to episode 7 when gosh, now I'm blanking on blanking on the guy's name when he says there's no balance without the Jedi. There's no balance in the Force.
Or Santeca.
Or Santeca. So does that mean that they, isn't it on some level they should be maybe searching out for Force sensitive people to like protect or whatever? Because it's like right now it's like, I don't think any, Vader is. They never show like exactly how they kind of polish off the last of the Jedi, but it's like it's extend to everybody who's Force sensitive. Is it, it's like maybe they should be looking at building Jedi. I mean, that would be a great way to do it, and you don't even have to contradict anything in the other movies. It's this idea that they create like a place for these people to go and hide from the Empire, and then. You can jump ahead into the EU post Return of the Jedi, and that's part of the, the initial thrust of the people that Luke trains, or people that, these two, rogue Jedi were, keeping these people hidden in hopes that the chosen one, or whoever the chosen one is, because they keep changing that, the person will come back and bring balance to the Force and have like these Jedi to train. I think it would be kind of an interesting way to go, because right now they're really not pushing that kind of Force thing. I mean, like what is Ezra really trying to find out,
Right.
And we know his parents are gone. There's really no mysteries left in his story. Same thing with Kanan.
Yeah. Well, and in Inside Man, right, Thrawn, when he's studying the art and he brings Callus and some other random lieutenant in, right? He asks them to describe the art that he's seeing. It's, Sabine's Phoenix thing with, a little love cat next to it, right? He says, oh, Lothal, this place means something to them. They'll always return here to Lothal. And so, now that they have kind of a new mission, a new goal to find this desert planet with twin suns, right? Do they start leaving Lothal behind, or are we just randomly going to see them show up on Lothal again and without much explanation, right? Is Ryder going to take a bigger role in this? I doubt it, but I don't think that's the last we saw of Ryder.
Right.
And so, yeah, like taking these first steps into a larger world, but also, they've said in the show, okay, well, these people will return to Lothal repeatedly. So I guess that means we'll be seeing them return to Lothal, but for what reason? There doesn't seem to be much keeping them there. I guess if Callus stays on Lothal, right, then we'll get more Callus action. So I would expect at least one more episode on Lothal this season, but what role that plays in the larger story of moving everything forward towards the Rebel Alliance and towards Rogue One, honestly, I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Exactly. Well, I think much like they didn't really, the kind of cliffhanger they left us on Rebels. Yeah. I guess we'll kind of leave this show on a kind of a cliffhanger. Not really.
Mm-hmm.
But
this will probably be the last episode of the year for us, right?
I guess scheduling is just kind of like, unless we can work something out, and we'll talk about that. But yeah, it's like you got your family stuff, my family stuff. But I mean, the truth is as much as I'd love to be like, I'll be excited and I'll be wanting to talk about it. This show I always think will benefit from like maybe a more considered opinion. Maybe I'd like to see the movie a couple times before I actually start really reviewing it and talking about it. And everyone else, I don't know how many, I don't know much about our listeners, to be perfectly frank. I appreciate them, but we don't all talk much. So I don't know how you guys are going to enjoy it. If you're like first night, last night, I'm going to see it on video or whatever. I mean, it's absolutely your choice and your take. I would like to see if somebody would, when you do see it, if you could send us an email at host with an S at talkingbirdcast.com. I would really, this time around, I really like some of your guys' input, good, bad, or indifferent. There's no bad opinions. There's just your opinion. And I I'd love to hear any insights you have, and we can talk about it. And, cause we're going to, definitely be talking a lot about, Rogue One in the new year. You obviously know that we have our Twitter at talkingbirdcast.com. Send us an email though. We want your full thoughts. Don't send us a tweet.
Yeah.
There's not enough info in a tweet. If you know, the Amazon link, talkingbirdcast.com/Amazon. It's a great way to support the show. We obviously have our website, www.talkingbirdcast.com. I'm going to make one caveat. If I have something super important to say, like right off the bat, I will be probably writing something and putting it on the site there, and I'll tweet it out. But most likely you're going to get the full meal deal by tuning in when we finally come back from the holidays.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have anything that you wanted to add?
No, thanks for listening. Appreciate everyone listening this year, and we'll see you on the other side of Rogue One.
Yes, I hope everybody gets a chance to go out and see it, and I hope it's great. All my criticisms and anxieties aside, I always want these movies to be good, and I have a vested interest in it. I'm not going to say it if I don't believe it, but deep down, I want these movies to be good. And yes, thanks for listening all year, and we always appreciate it. And for Talking Birdcast, I have been Robert Zachary.
I'm still John Llewellyn.
May the Force be with you.
This is a huge deal for me. I was sick from school today.
I want to be the guy coming out of the theater going, it was great! That's who I want to be.
I thought there was going to be people here already, and it turned out there wasn't being. I was like, wow, I'm the first one.
Well, it's Star Wars. It's like the original trilogy was just so phenomenal. People have been awaiting this for like 16 years.
It's grabbing history and maybe going with it and becoming part of it and giving a story to our children.
It's going to be one of the many wonders of the world. There are now 8 wonders of the world. One of them being this movie.
We've been waiting since the last one came out for 16 years. So this is a big thing. I mean, we've been waiting a long time. It's time to get back into it. It's the event of the whole thing.
I've been waiting 15 years since Return of the Jedi came out to see the prequel.
There's no way it's going to be a disappointment.
Are there any of you that think this is going to be a lousy movie?
I feel like, I don't know, like it's exciting. It's going to be going to the first show of like Phantom Menace, and I don't know, that's all I can say. Thanks.
10 loved it, 7 liked it or thought it was okay, and 2 are no longer Star Wars fans.
Fantastic. Go see it as quick as you can.
It was better than all of them.
I think the lightsaber battles were the greatest.
It was good, dude. It was really good.
So worth it. So worth it.
They're going to love it. They're going to go nuts. It was amazing.
I couldn't get enough of it. I want to see it again already.
It was amazing. It was everything I thought it was going to be and more.
Non-stop.
I can't wait to see it in 3 hours. I'll be lining up straight in the line again.
A lot of action, a lot of noise. It was cool.
I thought it was fantastic. Yeah, it was really good, must say. I think it's going to be the hugest thing. The hugest thing.
It was intense. It was incredible. I loved it. It was awesome.
We got tickets for the 9 a.m. show. We're going to stick around and see it again.
I thought it was better than Return of the Jedi, personally, so they did a good job.
I like the special effects. I thought Lucas did a really good job.
I think that little Anakin Skywalker, and everyone's going to say it, stole that movie.
Thumbs up or thumbs down?
God, I'd put my feet up if I could.
It's fantastic. Good special effects, good story. Lives up to the originals.
A very good movie. I believe the kids are going to love it.
It is worth every minute of it. We've waited 16 years for this moment. An unbiased opinion, how was the film?
I'd give it a definite thumbs up.
It was like new because all the guys were new and you didn't really know how everything fit together before.
So intense. I mean, my heart was beating. It's still beating now. And I just screamed, literally.
What do you think, Cole? With the white?
Yeah.
And who's your favorite?
Darth Maul.
Pandemonium. Everybody was out there just screaming, yelling. When Lucasfilm logo came up and 20th Century Fox came up, that was the best.
I like Darth Vader.
Oh, okay.
He's a little kid. Do you want to marry him?
What?
You want to marry him?
You don't want to marry him?
It'll be a great movie 20 years from now. It'll be part of 6 great movies. Unless the next 2 really suck, but I don't think they will.
What'd you think of it?
I think it was an excellent movie. I think Mr. Lucas did a fabulous job. Special effects were wonderful, and the storyline was wonderful. And we'll probably come back and watch it a couple more times.
Like that long-eared alien dude. I mean, he always messed up, but he ended up helping his army and stuff. I thought it was pretty good.
Thumbs way down.
You didn't like it?
No, I think I deserve a public apology from George Lucas.